It was one of those Saturday nights that you don't want to end. Spring was giving way to summer, and the day turned out to be warm, but not hot. In the morning, I spent a lot of time in the yard, cutting the grass, trimming the hedges, tending to the flower beds around the house. The result has always made me and my family proud. And so, when evening approached, the heat had long subsided. I enjoyed time on the back patio with my brother-in-law. Paul and I had a couple of drinks each while we prepared steaks, chicken, sausages, as well as onions and halloumi for the hungry people inside. In the kitchen, the women prepared salads, side dishes, and bread for our lazy evening feast. I heard Melody setting the table while Kim was in the kitchen with Harmony. My father-in-law and mother-in-law, William and Martha, bustled about, helping to get the children in order and seated at the table. I heard the sound of a car approaching the house, then the muffled sound of a doorbell, followed by a knock on the door. A few minutes later, my father John walked out into the backyard, leaving a couple of apple pies in the kitchen and a large tub of ice cream for dessert. He patted me on the back. "What's up, guys?" he asked, opening the refrigerator in the back and taking out a drink. "Great, Dad. Hey, did I hear correctly that you came with a new car?" "Yeah, sounds great, doesn't it?" Dad recently retired and decided to treat himself to a new V8 Ford Mustang convertible. Unfortunately, my mom died a few years ago, so he was on his own, and honestly, after all the work he'd done in his life, he deserved a little fun. "Of course, John, you'll have to take me for a ride sometime." Paul had a slightly envious look in his eyes as he looked at the car, dreaming of a Mustang like his, but it was a dream that wouldn't come true with 3 kids, even if Kim had agreed to a sports car. We talked a little more about my father's new car and finished cooking the meat. We piled everything into a couple of foil-lined trays, and each of us took everything inside to begin the feast. It turned out that I missed the second doorbell, as we had 2 more guests who were definitely not on the invite list. When I entered the room, the range of reactions and emotions from everyone present was varied. The children were excited. It was time for dinner, and they could already smell the sausages being cooked. Melody and Harmony were puzzled. Perhaps they had some vague idea about our guests. However, they never met them in person. Paul and Kim were angry, and Dad suddenly looked upset. As for me, I was a mixture of surprise, disappointment, anger, fear, and, most of all, shock. So much so that I dropped the tray of meat I was carrying. The metal tray hit the floor with a crash, bringing everyone out of their thoughts, and everyone's eyes turned to me. Hi, Terry," Carol, my ex-wife, said, looking at me. She looked tired and haggard, and over the past few years she had gained a lot of weight in the most inappropriate places. Her once curvaceous and attractive form was now clearly hidden under layers of not-so-attractive fat. While I remained in good physical shape, perhaps even better than the last time we saw each other, if you believe those hungry eyes with which she looked at me. Surely, having come here without an invitation, she did not know what kind of reception to expect, but she understood that it would not be a joyful meeting. The second guest also looked at me. "Hi, Dad," Mackenzie, my ex-daughter, said before I could answer. Her head was slightly lowered, and she looked at me from under the worn baseball cap that I gave her when she turned 13. Mackenzie looked completely different from the girl who betrayed and rejected me several years ago. To be honest, she looked broken, just like her mother, and just weak. For what seemed like almost a minute, we all just looked at each other. The only sound was made by the children at the table, but even they sensed something was wrong and began to notice 2 uninvited guests, preventing them from getting their dinner. I sighed and bent down to pick up the tray of meat I had dropped, turned around and placed it on the table. I looked and signaled to Martha, who knew perfectly well who they were, and glared at them. "Martha, can you feed the children? I think it will take a little time." She stopped glaring at Carol and Mackenzie. Her gaze softened as she looked at me. Martha knew my pain better than anyone in this room. She was by my side through most of the events that happened over the years, and she could guess what I felt at that moment. My mother-in-law was one of the wisest women I knew, and to offend her family was to incur not only the wrath of Martha, but also of her many friends and associates in various communities. I had a feeling that Carol and Mackenzie had already faced her wrath more than once without my knowledge. Her mood changed. She was now focused on making sure all the children were fed, temporarily putting my former family out of her thoughts. "No problem, Terry darling. Do what you need to do. I'll take care of the kids." I turned back to my former family and frowned. For the sake of the children here, I will not say what I would like to say now. However, you need to know that none of you are welcome here. I had a hard time staying calm, and the words were almost out of my mouth. Carol looked upset, but seemed to have expected this reaction. Mackenzie seemed to be on the verge of tears. At that moment, Kim came over and stood next to me. Melody and Harmony came over too, sat on the other side of me, and Melody took my hand, letting me know she was there. Now she knew who these guests were, as did her sister Harmony, who had a good idea of how I felt. Carol sighed heavily and looked at everyone in the room before focusing her gaze back on me. Once upon a time, I adored these eyes and loved looking into them. Now I saw only a mask of pain, regret, and sadness, which surprised me. "We know, Terry, but we need to talk to you." As a child, if I wasn't at school or hanging out with friends, I worked in construction with my father, earning some pocket money. I always helped dig trenches or bring pipes. I studied hard at school, but I was not an academic. My report cards were good, but I was never an excellent student. However, I was good at manual labor, which showed in labor classes. My father was a plumber who worked primarily in the residential market, serving a few builders and occasionally doing commercial projects. The work went well, and my father always had a lot of orders, keeping him busy at the construction site. He had one apprentice, and when I could, I helped him. I was sure that I would also become a plumber. I had the physique and the ability to quickly absorb what my father showed me once. I met Carol in high school. We hit it off immediately and started dating the following year. It seemed to me that there was a spark between us. We laughed at the same jokes, listened to mostly the same music, and were interested in similar movies. She was a slender blonde with dirty blonde hair, brown eyes, nice B-cup breasts, and a round ass you wanted to squeeze. Most people would describe her as the girl next door. She wasn't a model, but she could attract attention when she wanted. My name was Terry Ader. I was a tall and strong guy, thanks to working with my father. I had short brown hair, brown eyes, and broad shoulders, thanks to a combination of genetics and hard work in construction. In order not to drag out the story, I will say that Carol and I deflowered each other. I wish I could say it was amazing, but we were both clumsy and inexperienced. However, we made it through and started having a lot of sex when we got the chance. The problem arose when Carol missed her period and found out she was pregnant. There were tears and upset parents on both sides, but we got engaged right after high school. Shortly after that, we got married and Mackenzie was born. Although I loved Carol, Mackenzie was my main happiness. If I wasn't working, I was spending time with Mackenzie. I was there when she started walking. Her first words were "Dad," and as she grew up, she loved spending time with me on construction sites, just as I did with my father. Carol didn't always like it, but she didn't mind because it gave her the opportunity to spend time with her friends without a baby in her arms. As for Carol and I, our relationship has not always been easy. We did a lot of things together. I loved her, but we had to work on the relationship. I imagine this is similar to many couples. After Mackenzie was born, I sometimes felt like I was getting in Carol's way. She never said it openly, but by the time Mackenzie was 3, I felt like Carol was looking down on me for being a plumber. We were friendly, and I would say that we loved each other. We had a fairly active sex life. Sometimes we had sex every day, and sometimes, when life got in the way, weeks could go by without sex. Overall, I thought we were a good couple until I came home one day after a hard day at work. 15 years have passed. I became a master plumber, certified in several areas of plumbing and working with a variety of products. Like my father, I collaborated with several builders. However, I went into slightly more commercial subcontracting than my father and did quite well. As a family, we lived quite well, and neither Carol nor Mac were in need. Whether it was school needs or shopping trips, They got what they needed, and more often than not, what they wanted. That fateful day, I returned home and parked my truck in the driveway of our modest three-bedroom home. Carol's car wasn't there, so I assumed she hadn't returned yet. I took off my dirty shoes and walked into the almost empty house. There was no furniture, paintings, or household appliances. At first, I thought we had been robbed, but everything was too neat. Nothing was broken, and things like the TV and my work laptop were still there. I tried to call Carol, but the call went to voicemail. Carol, I just got home and a lot of things are missing. Call me as soon as... When I walked into the kitchen, I saw that the table was still there, but in the center of the table, there was a stack of documents and a letter on top. I knew then that this was bad news, so I interrupted the message on my answering machine, my stomach clenching with anticipation. The letter on top was addressed to Terry, and it seemed to stare at me like a coiled snake ready to strike. With neither my wife nor daughter home and a lot of furniture missing, I knew I was in for a bad night. I pulled out a kitchen chair and opened the ill-fated letter. I knew that I might not read it, but sooner or later I would have to, so I had to do it like peeling off a Band-Aid. Carol wrote, Terry, by the time you read this, Mackenzie and I will have moved out of the house. I wish I could say that I'm a strong woman and can look you in the eyes, but the truth is that I don't want to see the look of betrayal on your face that will probably be there right now. I didn't want to have a "we need to talk" conversation, so I chose this route. There's no nice way to say this, but I fell in love with another man who is much better than you, and Mackenzie and I moved in with him today. You'll probably have questions, so I'll tell you everything you need to know so you don't have to look for Mackenzie and me. Your first question is who? Well, this is Dr. Mackenzie, and I chose him because he can provide for us in a way that you never could as a plumber. Your next question is how long has this been going on? Well, I've been dating Stephen for a year and a half now. It was hard to hide it from you, and Mackenzie and I often thought you would notice, but you never did. I'd say I'm sorry, but I'm not, and nothing I say will comfort you right now. Finally, you'll probably ask why. But this is a difficult question. But basically, it's all about your profession. You are a plumber, and he is a doctor. He can provide us with the best things in life, and you will always work in the dirt. You are a loving father, a good husband, and you are good in bed. I write this with some regret, but for Mackenzie and me, being a plumber is not enough. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, but that's all I'll tell you. When it comes to divorce, there are a few things you need to know. First, I took all the furniture I wanted. Everything else is left to you. Mackenzie took her things because she has no intention of coming to see you for reasons I'll explain later. I've already divided our finances. I took half of our savings. In the end, I want half the price of the house, so our lawyers will decide that. The second document is Mackenzie's adoption papers. Stephen will adopt her. Make no mistake, this is what Mackenzie and I decided. If you sign them, you won't have to pay child support. I'm sure you're in shock right now, but that's what we wanted. The last document is a restraining order that will remain in effect until the divorce is finalized. This is to ensure that you don't come near me, Mackenzie, or Stephen until everything is completed. I'm sorry this happened, but unfortunately, a plumber can never provide for us like a doctor. So that's the choice we made. Goodbye, Terry. Carol. I must have sat there for half an hour before I moved. My emotions were muted or screaming at me. I didn't know what to feel because my wife and daughter had just walked out of my life without warning. If the letter is true, this has been going on for 18 months without me suspecting anything. I read the letter 3 times before there was a knock on the door. Slowly, I stood up and walked towards the door. It was my older sister, Kim. Terry, I got a message from Carol that you're not feeling well and you need help. She looked at me and suddenly my emotions returned. I collapsed on the hallway floor, sobbing. They're gone. She sat down next to me. What do you mean gone? Terry, what happened? I still held the letter in my hands and handed it to Kim. She read it while I sat there. Her neck turned red as she read the letter. These damn bitches, she almost screamed, having finished reading the letter. That damn bitch and her ungrateful daughter. I was surprised by her anger. Although Carol and Kim were never close, they were close as siblings, and Kim always supported Mackenzie when she needed it. Now everything becomes clear, she looked at me. Get up, brother, we need to get down to business. Sitting and crying is not in our rules. Come on, get moving. She helped me into the bathroom and turned on the shower. I was still in my dirty work clothes, so, leaving me with orders to wash up and return to the kitchen, I spent 10 minutes in the shower, letting the hot water pour down my back. I admit, I spent most of my time feeling sorry for myself and wondering what I did wrong to lose my wife and daughter at the same time. As I got out of the shower, I heard Kim swearing in the kitchen. I dried myself off, got dressed, and went to her. She sat and read all the documents that Carol left. She saw me enter the room and almost growled. Normally, I would judge someone for opening and studying legal documents. However, Kim was not just my big sister, she was my lawyer. So when I sat down, she reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "How are you feeling, Terry?" I looked at her. "I don't know, Kim. I think I'm in shock. I didn't understand what I did wrong for my wife and daughter to leave me without warning. Nothing foreshadowed this, even in the morning when I left. Carol gave me the usual kiss on the cheek, and Mackenzie hugged me and wished me a good day. Nothing to suggest that." I pointed to the documents. Kim frowned. "Terry, I've looked at these documents, and they're very carefully prepared. I can see they spent a lot of time putting them together, so this is clearly not a spontaneous decision. It's all well thought out and very cool. However, it also highlights a few points." "Which ones?" "Well, I didn't think much of it at the time, but over the past few months, Carol has asked me several times about what the legal issues are around your finances. Like, what's the difference between your business and personal finances? I thought she was hinting at that you are going to expand this house or save more money for Mackenzie for university. However, now I see that it was all about that." She waved her hand at the divorce papers. "That also explains why Carol wanted me to come tonight. She knew I would be representing you, and from the looks of these documents, she wants things to go quickly so she can marry Stephen Morrison." I nodded. "What about Mackenzie and this adoption she was talking about?" Her mood darkened. "To me, this is the worst thing they've done. It robs you of paternity. This document," she held up another voluminous document, "is a fully prepared adoption plan. These things can take a long time to complete at this stage. Of the four, Stephen, Carol, and Mackenzie have already signed the necessary signatures, and only yours is needed for Stephen Morrison to become her legal father as soon as Carol marries him." I nodded again, feeling the world spin out of control. "There's not much I can do, right?" "There's a lot you can do, but it's going to be expensive. And honestly, with how Carol and Mackenzie set it up, I don't think it's worth it. And Terry, it's not just Carol. Your little princess has been in this from the very beginning. Started, if I'm reading these adoption papers correctly. They deceived you, brother." I continued to nod, not saying anything, just looking at my hand in my older sister's. Kim squeezed my hand. "Terry, look at me." I looked at Kim. "Right now you are in a daze. Your body is, as you said earlier, in a state of shock, and I don't want you to drink, although it seems tempting right now." She smiled. A strange expression appeared on her face. "Actually, I want you to come with me to the hospital." "To the hospital? Why?" "As your sister, I want to make sure you're okay. But as your lawyer, I need you to trust me." She collected the documents, put me in her car, and drove me to the hospital. Little did I know that this trip would change my life forever, having a huge impact on the next few years. Kim was driving me to the hospital, and we didn't talk much on the way. I looked out the window, again wondering what I had done to deserve this. Finally, we got to the hospital and stood in line. It was early evening, so the line wasn't too long. Having been through this with clients before, Kim asked for a specific doctor, and we were told we might have to wait a bit. While we sat and waited, Kim went over all the details on the paperwork. I was just sitting there, spending time on my phone, browsing Facebook. I noticed that Carol and Mackenzie had unfriended and blocked me. I was a little surprised, although I probably shouldn't have been. They just threw me out of their lives without looking back. I spent some time in a few groups, looked at a few emails, simply because I had nothing else to do. We had been sitting there for about 45 minutes, and I had just put my phone away when I saw an elderly lady enter. She had fiery red hair and expressive green eyes. She had milky white skin and a perfect figure for someone who I would consider to be about 45. She was on crutches as her left leg was in a cast. As she approached us, one of her crutches got caught on the edge of one of the hospital chairs. The crutch slipped out and she began to fall. Without thinking, I jumped up and rushed to catch her. I partially made it and rolled when we both fell. I grabbed her by the waist and made her land on me instead of the hard tile floor. We both sighed in shock. A minute later, I helped her get up. She was embarrassed, apologetic, and very grateful. I helped her sit in one of the chairs next to Kim and me, while one of the nurses who had noticed the fall came over to check on us. The red-haired woman's voice sounded like one of those old actresses from Doris Day movies. He was melodious and spoke of wisdom while radiating compassion towards the object of his attention. She turned to the nurse. "It's okay, honey. This fine young man saved me." I blushed. At 32, it had been several years since I had been called young. The nurse checked her information and returned a few minutes later, saying that she was registered and her doctor would be available shortly. She turned to me again, and we talked for a few minutes. I learned her name was Martha. Her husband William parked the car after dropping her off at the main entrance, not wanting her to walk far. They weren't local, from Bathurst, and she had accidentally fallen and broken her ankle about a week ago. This was her last inspection before they received permission to go home. A few minutes later, her husband came in and joined us. We shook hands and Martha introduced us. They were a wonderful couple, and you could tell by the way they held hands that they truly loved each other. When we talked, it turned out that William owned one of the largest plumbing supply companies in the area, and I knew his company well, having often used their products. We spent the next hour discussing work matters. I found the conversation with them relaxing, and for a few minutes I forgot about everything that had happened to me, enjoying meeting some really nice people. When the conversation turned to what we were doing here, I shrugged and Kim intervened. "It's a little sensitive, so I'd like you to keep it a secret, if that's okay." William and Martha nodded. Terry had a terrible day today. He returned home this afternoon to find his house empty. His wife and daughter left without telling him for another man. All he received was a letter and divorce papers, including two of the most disgusting documents I've ever seen, in the form of adoption papers and a restraining order. That's why I brought him here to get him examined and treated, because it may not be noticeable, but he's in shock and I want to document his condition in the medical records. William and Martha just looked at me. I returned to my numb state as Kim told these two people a summary of my story that afternoon. While Kim was telling her side of the story with my permission, Martha touched my arm. A tear rolled down her cheek. "Oh my God, Terry, I don't understand how they could do this. It's obvious that you are a kind and gentle person. Not everyone would put themselves on the line to help someone like you just helped me a few minutes ago. I know that we don't know you, but you don't seem like the kind of person who deserves this kind of treatment from two people you love." I didn't know what to say, but like a big sister, Kim chimed in again. "He has done nothing but love and take care of them both for years." In her letter, his wife states that being a plumber is not enough for both of them, and that the doctor they go to can provide for them much better. William snorted and shook his head. Kim continued. "I don't know what kind of man Stephen Morrison is, but if he did something like this, it shows that his moral character is questionable." I heard William and Martha inhale sharply. "Did you say Stephen Morrison?" asked William. "Yes, Dr. Stephen Morrison," Kim replied. She cocked her head to the side and raised an eyebrow. "Why?" William looked at Martha, and she nodded her head slightly. "Sorry." William stood up and walked to the front desk. Kim and I looked at Martha. Something was happening. William went to change doctors for me. You see, I was supposed to meet Dr. Morrison for a checkup. Now it was Kim and I's turn to inhale sharply. William and I are held to certain, shall we say, standards. And Terry, after hearing your story, I don't want to be treated by someone who could be so cold and ruthless as to steal someone's wife and daughter by doing so, like they did to you. So we will change the doctor. A few minutes later, William returned and sat down next to Martha. Not even a minute later, Dr. Stephen Morrison himself appeared to find out what was going on. He noticed William and Martha. Sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Delodditz, I was informed that you. And then he saw me sitting there. Stephen Morrison was a little older than me, powerfully built, with short, sandy, thinning blonde hair and somewhat chubby fingers. He was a head shorter than me and had a noticeable belly that matched his chubby fingers. But Dr. Stephen Morrison walked like a man who had had everything easy in life, probably who had inherited everything and never faced any difficulty. After looking at me, he suddenly ignored William and Martha. Now I was in his line of sight, and he looked at me like I was a 3-day-old pizza left on the kitchen counter. You, Terry Ader, have no right to be here. A note of contempt appeared in his voice. His manner of communication instantly changed. Kim stood up and stood between Stephen and me. Dr. Morrison, I am Kim Ader, Terry's older sister and his lawyer. I state here that we had no idea who you were, what you looked like, or that you worked here until we found out a few minutes ago. If Kim's words gave him pause, he didn't show it. On the contrary, the contempt on his face only intensified. It doesn't matter. He's violating the terms of the restraining order and needs to leave immediately. As you wish, Dr. Morrison, please note that I will record this interaction and your demands. We will leave now and will seek treatment for Terry elsewhere. Stephen laughed, but it was an unpleasant laugh. He couldn't help but try to finish off the man lying down. Apparently, this was his character. Treatment, he snorted. For what? Because he's a pathetic loser. He puffed out his plump chest. His wife and daughter left him for a better man. Stupid plumber. I noticed that everyone in the waiting room, including William and Martha, looked at him sharply. But a fool is a fool, and he continued. Such a pathetic cuckold, no wonder he needs treatment. But it will be somewhere else, as he is not welcome in this hospital and is in violation of the terms of the restraining order. Leave before I call security to remove you from the premises. Kim nodded. I will record your words and your derogatory comments towards Mr. Ader. And please note that, in accordance with the terms of the above restraining order, now that we know that you work here, we are leaving. I began to seethe with anger. Before me stood a pompous fool who destroyed my family, stole my wife, and decided to make me his daughter. I stood up and clenched my fists. I could take that fat bastard down with one punch. Who cares about jail time? It would be worth it. But even as I started to move towards him, William stopped me. He put his hand on my shoulder before my anger exploded, looked at me, and shook his head before I did anything stupid. Stephen turned to William and Martha, now ignoring me, his manner becoming friendly again. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Delodditz, if you will follow me, I will examine you now. Please note that everything this person has told you is probably not true and should not influence your treatment decision. William shook his head again. His hand was still on my shoulder as Kim gathered her things so we could leave. I apologize, Dr. Morrison. However, having witnessed your comments just now, regardless of the restraining order, you have disrespected a person in pain in a place where people should be treated. I cannot in my right mind allow my wife to be treated. You in a hospital where employees of your status can treat people as carelessly as you just treated Mr. Ather. Therefore, we will also seek treatment elsewhere. He turned and helped Martha to her feet. She picked up her crutches, and the four of us headed towards the main entrance. William stopped and turned as the sliding doors opened, then addressed Stephen again. Dr. Morrison, please tell the hospital director and your regional director that at this time, my financial support for this hospital and its regional medical centers is ending. Instead, I will refer her to other medical institutions where the staff is professional. When they ask why, I'm sure you'll know what to tell them." With that, he turned to us and left Stephen standing there like a beached fish, his mouth open. The four of us ended up going to a private hospital a few minutes down the road. Unfortunately, they didn't have an emergency room. However, they were open, and William's name seemed to open several doors. We were assigned a doctor, Dr. Marge Hill. I insisted that Martha be examined first, and a few minutes later she came out with permission to go home. When I was called in for my consultation, Kim came with me and told Dr. Hill exactly what happened. Dr. Hill ran several tests on me and took blood samples. "Mr. Other, from tests it appears that you are suffering from a mild form of shock after today's events. Your sister wants to undergo a medical examination of your physical condition and mental abilities. Most people don't understand that these events can change body chemistry, and most don't think they'll be tested right away." Marge smiled at me. "She's looking out for you." After the tests were completed, including the blood work, we returned to the waiting room, and I was surprised to find William and Martha still waiting for us. We talked for a few minutes, and I found that they wanted to make sure I was okay. Kim told them I would be fine and thanked them for their concern. We exchanged details, and Martha made me promise that I would call them once a week and let them know I was okay. I promised and am happy to say that I more or less kept that promise for the next 6 months, keeping them informed of what was going on. When Kim took me home, she tucked me into bed and made sure I took the first medication prescribed, something to help me sleep and some mild antidepressants. She laid me down, kissed my head, and said she would check on me in the morning. I slept soundly and didn't wake up until late the next day. For me, the following months were something like a walking dream from which I could not wake up. All I did was go to work and come home to an empty house. After reviewing the documents, Kim spoke with Carol and Mackenzie's lawyer. She reluctantly made me sign the divorce and adoption papers with a couple of minor changes. The advice was that Mackenzie was delighted with Stephen, and I didn't need to be her father anymore. About a month before the final court date, where the divorce was to become final, two things happened. First of all, it was my 33rd birthday. I received messages from friends and even got a call from Martha wishing me a happy birthday on behalf of William and her. Kim and her husband Paul, along with my parents, invited me to dinner. I was very grateful, but very reserved. I hoped beyond hope that I would receive something from my daughter. However, nothing came, no messages, nothing. I thought I'd try calling, but I figured that might be harassment under a restraining order and could get me in trouble, so I didn't. Secondly, a week later Mackinac turned 15. So again, knowing that I might be in trouble, I did nothing. However, that evening, around 9, I received a text message from an unknown number. "You should call me and wish me a happy birthday and tell me what you got me for my birthday." I almost lost it. It was obvious it was Mackenzie's. For almost 15 years, Mackenzie was always so happy on my birthday, always hugging me tightly and trying to spoil me in the sweetest way that only children could. Since our birthdays were the same, it was always important to us to make each other feel special. This year, I didn't even appreciate a message on my birthday, even though she knew I was probably lonely and hurting. But when it was her birthday, she wanted me to call her and tell her what I got her. For the umpteenth time since this all started, I wondered where the caring little girl I loved and wanted to go to work with me had gone to. Of course, I didn't call her back or send her a message, but I hit a wall. I stuck my hand into it. I was so upset and spent most of the evening resting my knuckles on a bag of steaming ice. The next day, Kim came to check on me and noticed my hand, the hole in the wall, and my general depressed mood. When she asked what happened, I showed her the text, and she came and hugged me, saying she understood. "Don't worry, Terry, I didn't get anything from that little bitch either." I looked down at my red and swollen hand. I did. "Oh, Terry," her tone softened, "I'm so sorry, little brother. I know this is causing you a lot of pain." Then, for the next half hour, she just hugged me. Soon our day in court arrived, and I was there with Kim on one side and Carol was there with her lawyers. I'm sure it was curtsy to Stephen. The evil bastard was sitting behind them, on the other side of the courtroom from us. He continued to stare at me while Carol didn't even look me in the eyes. Mackenzie was at school and wouldn't have been in the room anyway. When the judge entered, both sides presented their final statements. Both attorneys then provided us with agreed financial statements as of the date of separation when Carol and McInnes moved out. Next, the judge reviewed the updated documents. He had already seen most of the content before, so he watched the additional material. He spoke. With respect to the matter of divorce between Mr. Terry Oder and Miss Carol Oder, it should be noted that Miss Carol Oder's petition for divorce is granted. Carol, Stephen, and her team looked relieved. The judge raised his hand. However, there are several notable points in the divorce petition that I would like to highlight. Firstly, this court hears more than its fair share of divorce cases, and it is not often that I come across cases where a spouse leaves his partner, who is essentially a loving and caring husband and father. Neither one nor the other. I often see adoptions involving divorce, so when it turns out that something is wrong, I tend to be more interested in why and what is being asked. Carol's lawyers lost their smiles and looked at the judge. Kim and I didn't say anything. While there is no legal basis for this divorce not to be granted, I must say that I am appalled by the behavior of Mrs. Carol Ozer and her daughter. Intentionally deceiving a loving man for many months, having a sexual relationship, systematically working to leave him and limit his access to his daughter is the height of moral corruption. I also have statements from Mr. and Mrs. Delautais regarding the incident that occurred the night of the separation. The judge looked at me. Mr. Other showed true character, and when presented with one of the parties named in the restraining order, Dr. Stephen Morrison, in lieu of conflict, he refused. As stated above, there is no legal basis for ending this divorce. However, based on the individual requests of both parties. Regarding the division of property, the following will be noted. I saw Carol and her legal team tense up. Kim looked at the judge. This shouldn't have happened. The judge continued. Mrs. Carol Other is entitled to half of the savings in the joint accounts owned by Mr. and Mrs. Other. It should be noted that this has already been processed and the joint accounts are closed. Further, the motion that all university funds intended for Mrs. Mackenzie Oder in the amount, he checked his notes, $142,000, be transferred to Mrs. Carol Oder for the support of her daughter, is rejected. Everyone gasped. Your Honor, I object, Carol's lawyer demanded. Objection overruled, consultant. Financial records show Mr. John Other contributed 100% of the funds to the account, while Miss Carol Other contributed nothing for many years despite working part-time. It is also noted that one of the documents that has been processed is a request that Mr. Ader give up his rights to his daughter, as Mr. Stephen Morrison wishes to adopt Miss Ader with the consent of Mrs. Carol Ader and Miss Mackenzie Ader. Since Miss Mackenzie Water has not yet reached university age and does not wish to retain Mr. Ader's name, this court sees no reason why Mr. Ader should be forced to pay funds to someone who does not want him. These funds will remain at Mr. Ader's complete disposal. Volume. If he decides to provide funds for Miss Ader's continued education after today's decision, it will be entirely at his discretion. I was stunned. I had been putting money into this account for Mackenzie since she was born, and it was a surprise to learn that I had no obligation to provide anything to either Carol or Mackenzie. The judge continued. The petition for Mr. John Ader to pay alimony and child support from the date of separation until Mrs. Carol Ader marries the above-mentioned Dr. Stephen Morrison is denied. From the petition and how Mr. Ader was misled by Mrs. Ader and Miss Ader, this court finds that throughout this time he was not given reasonable opportunity to respond. It is also taken into account that Mrs. Ader and Miss Ader have been living with Dr. Morrison since the separation, as stated in the letter that Mrs. Ader left for Mr. Ader on the day of the separation. In addition, the petitions filed in this court indicate that Mrs. Ader and Mr. Morrison intend to marry immediately after my decision. And finally, the adoption process of Miss Ader will be completed immediately after. Weddings in view of these circumstances, this court sees no reason to grant the request for payments. Finally, with respect to the primary residence owned by Mr. and Mrs. Ader, I grant full use of the home to Mr. Ader without any financial obligation. As mentioned, Mrs. Ader and Miss After already have a new primary residence that does not require them to make any expenses. If Mr. Ader decides to sell the current home, he will be required to provide 40% of the after-tax profit to Mrs. Ader. Nobody said anything. I don't think anyone expected this outcome. Mr. John Ader's divorce from Mrs. Carol Ader has been approved and the court adjourned. We were taken out of the room while the next case was being prepared. Kim was delighted in the hallway. It's rare that divorces work out in favor of the injured party, especially the man, when it comes to custody, but Carol hurt herself by leaving that letter and demanding that I let Stephen adopt Mackenzie. As we left the court, we walked past Carol and Stephen along with their lawyers. As we approached, they stopped talking and looked at us. Kim took my hand and continued to walk past them with great satisfaction on her face, while Stephen gave me angry looks. Carol looked upset, then angry when we almost walked past her. I smiled at them and continued walking. I heard her whisper, "You bastard," but Kim continued to lead me before I could respond. That night, I received a call from my parents. Mom felt bad, but was glad to hear about the result, although she was sad that she would no longer see her granddaughter. Dad was pragmatic, but also upset. Paul came over, joining Kim and I, and we, Kim and Paul, ended up having a burger dinner and a couple of beers. It wasn't a celebration, no one wins in divorce, but I came out of it all relatively unscathed financially. The only unexpected call came the next day from William and Martha. "Hi, Terry, how are you? All things considered, it's not that bad. Although I feel like my heart will never be the same again, Carol's betrayal hurt me, but Mackenzie, I just don't understand." "We understand, son," William noted. "We love our daughters more than life itself. Giving up someone just for money and someone with an overweight and superiority complex is simply unfathomable." I had to agree with William. It was unclear. I have a feeling that a lot of it was her mother's doing. Although I never suspected it, looking back I see that I was never enough for Carol. She always wanted the newest things, spent money faster than me. I had to make do with a used truck for work, while she always had a new Lexus. I didn't understand that at the time. I guess I wasn't good enough for her, and she taught that to her daughter. I felt a little depressed about the loss of my daughter. I think they sensed it too, as William changed the subject. "So what are you going to do now, Terry?" "Honestly, I don't know. I talked to my dad, and I'm thinking about selling the house and moving far away so that I don't have a chance of meeting either of them. I have my truck, my tools, and my skills, so I can find a job anywhere, so I think space might be a good idea." There was a moment's pause. Terry: "Yes, Martha." "Well, William and I have been thinking about something, and we'd like to ask you." My interest increased. Ever since I met this couple, they have treated me like family. Even though they didn't know me since that night in the hospital, they always asked how I was doing, almost as if I was their child. "What would you like to ask?" I heard them whispering about something. Something was happening. William cleared his throat. Terry, we were wondering if you would consider working for us." "Your jobs? You mean at Dilaudits Inc.?" "Well, yes. Recently, one of our managers decided to retire. He has been with the company for over 40 years, and we cannot find anyone with the right skills to replace him. However, since you are a plumber, you know the product and its use, you could be the perfect candidate. Martha has been telling me to talk to you for weeks, but I wanted to wait until your divorce is finalized. So if you're thinking about moving, perhaps you'd be willing to consider our offer." I was stunned. This couple just offered me what sounded like a management position with them. "Terry, are you here?" asked Martha. Yes. Sorry, guys. You shocked me. Of course I'm interested. This might be what I need." We spent the next hour discussing details. They told me what they needed, and although it was a little outside of my management experience, the operational details were well within my scope as a plumber. They needed me to help control the quality of their manufacturing process. As I mentioned earlier, Dilates manufactures a wide range of plumbing products that are sold here in Australia and overseas. They have 3 production sites and several trucks for transportation and logistics. The key to their success was the quality of their products. Therefore, offering me the role of quality manager was important both for them and for me. They advised that my base salary would be almost double my current annual income as a sole trader, and with performance bonuses, it could be significantly more if I put in the effort. I agreed on the condition that I could show the contract to Kim before formal acceptance. They were happy with this and approved that I was taking care of myself. When I told Kim about this opportunity, she was very happy for me. It would get me out of town and away from Carol and Mackenzie. She knew William and Martha from the hospital, so she was sure that my new bosses were good people. The next day, I accepted the offer and began the moving process. Instead of selling the house, I turned to an agent to rent it out. That way I could earn income from it and not have to pay anything to Carol. After 2 weeks, a tenant was found who was ready to move in about 6 weeks. I found a small rented house not far from the Dilates office. It was a 2-bedroom apartment with parking and storage, giving me plenty of room for my truck and tools. The agency was happy that I rented for 12 months at once. While I was preparing to move, I also learned that Stephen and Carol had gotten married. This also meant that Stephen had adopted my daughter, and her name was now Mackenzie Morrison. I was no longer her father. I thought it would hit me a lot harder, but it didn't. Although I was sad, it just happened. I think I've moved on with my life. The night before I left, Mom, Dad, Kim, and Paul came over, and we had an amazing dinner with Thai food from a place Paul found by chance. Unfortunately, this was the 3rd time since last that I saw my mother outside the hospital. We didn't know it at the time, but she had cancer, and although she was being tested, Mom and Dad had not yet received a diagnosis. So, now that it's all said and done, have you heard anything from Carol or Mackenzie? No, Mom, to be honest, I didn't expect it. I heard they had a big wedding. Mackenzie was part of the wedding ceremony and rejoiced at her new father. Yes, but I heard that there are already problems in paradise, said my sister with a sparkle in her eyes. Is it true? I asked. She nodded. Yes, apparently, after that evening at the hospital, Dr. Stephen Moron was put on probation. Apparently, the loss of one of their major donors and his transfer to another hospital did not go unnoticed. Of course, it also helped that some lawyer somewhere provided evidence and witnesses who saw him yell at the patient in an unprofessional manner. We all laughed. Some kind of lawyer? Well, I heard that she is incredibly beautiful and smart. She smiled. But I will keep an eye on Dr. Stupid. I told the hospital that if there are any more complaints, we will demand compensation. Their response was to put him on probation, and he would not receive any bonuses for the next 2 years. So I'm sure between that and no money coming out of your university account, things aren't as rosy as they should be for the newlyweds and his new daughter. The next day, movers arrived, picked up the remaining furniture, and took it to storage. I'll send it to myself if I need it. The cleaning crew then came and cleaned up the house for my new tenants. I was securing my tools in my truck, preparing to drive to my new apartment, when I heard one of the last voices I expected to hear. Where are you going, Dad? I turned around and saw my ex-daughter, Mackenzie. A little further down the street, I saw Carol sitting in her new Lexus, watching us. I'm leaving, was my simple, monotonous answer. But Dad, why are you leaving? Now that it's over, you can see me again. I'd really like to see you. You can spoil me again and give me the birthday gift I'm sure you bought me. I chuckled and said nothing, checking the mount behind the driver's cab. Inside, I was torn between running to my little girl for a hug and screaming at her for how she hurt me. Mackenzie watched me for a few minutes, then turned on that whiny voice that all daughters use to get their way from their fathers. Daddy, don't you want to see me? My response was immediate. No, not really. I don't want to see you. I turned to her, letting a little of the anger from the last 6 months show on my face. Mackenzie, you're 15 years old, and you need to start understanding how the adult world works. And after what you and your mother did to me, Now your adult life begins between us. I tried not to get too angry, and I tried doubly hard not to swear. So no, I have no desire to see you, spoil you, or give you anything. But Dad, I'm still your little girl. You're still my father. I almost exploded. Instead, I slammed my fist into the side of the truck, the metal making a dull sound. Mackenzie pulled back. I left my fist pressed against the truck, looking at the ground as I spoke to the girl who had once been my dearest being. No, I'm not your father anymore. You and your mother demanded that I give up this right when I returned home that day. You left me without warning. I didn't get a goodbye. I wasn't allowed any contact for over 6 months since you both filed a restraining order on me. A single tear rolled down my cheek. I straightened up and looked at Mackenzie. What did I do to deserve this attitude? Can you tell? Can you, Mackenzie? I felt terrible telling off a 15-year-old girl, but 6 months of pain poured out of me. Carol got out of the car and walked towards us. Seeing the emotion show, she could hear what I was saying, so I continued. I came home that day and your mother tore my heart out. I loved her and gave her everything I could. When she needed to go, I was home to look after you. When she needed to cook dinner or clean the house, I helped. When any of you were sick, I took care of you. If she wanted new clothes or shoes, I made sure she had money for it. But this was not enough. Carol now stood behind Mackenzie, saying nothing. Then I turned my gaze to her for the first time, allowing the love that had turned to hate to be directed straight at my now ex-wife. She took everything from me, pretended to return the love I gave her, and had an affair, which I suspected nothing about for almost 2 years. I didn't pay attention because I loved her. But this was not the worst betrayal. Do you want to know what Mackenzie is? She looked at me like a deer in headlights. It was you, Mackenzie, my own daughter. I hit my chest, more tears flowing. My own flesh and blood betrayed me. Your mother tore my heart out, but you stood on it and set it on fire. None of you ever bothered to check if I was okay. When your new father told you that I was in the hospital, did any of you bother to check if I was okay or injured? No, on my birthday, there was no greeting or message that you miss me. But on your birthday, Maccanes, tell me that I can call you. I had no idea what I could do because I couldn't be harmed, and you both added insult to injury by putting a restraining order on me when you both left me. Then you both told me to give up. It's my right to be your father. The people closest to me betrayed me. So no, Mackenzie, there will be no gifts for your birthday. There will be nothing for Christmas or the weekend. If you need anything, don't call me. Don't ask me to help you. You both almost killed me, so there's nothing more from me. I'm no longer your father, and honestly, as selfish as you were, I don't recognize the girl I knew. If you want something, you need to go and ask your new father, because for me the day you both left, you both died, and I will mourn you both for the rest of my life, and it makes it easier for me to think about you dead than alive after what you both did to me. It will hurt less. My tears streamed from my eyes by the end of my impassioned speech, the first real tears I had shed in months. Mackenzie, unable to bear it, turned and ran back to the car. My heart broke again, but nothing could be done. Carol tried to catch her, but she ran past her. Carol turned to me as the car door slammed shut, blocking Mackenzie from me, and my now ex-wife took her rage out on me. How could you do this, Terry? She is your daughter and wanted to come and make amends. You're a real class bastard. You know it. She's not my damn daughter anymore, and I'm only this way because of the way you acted. But that's not my problem anymore, is it? You took care of that. She looked at me intently. So that's it. You just give up and run away like a pathetic excuse for a man. Stephen was right about you. No, Carol, as I told you, you and your daughter destroyed me. You took all my love for you both and killed it. All that paperwork and those damn adoption papers. They had been preparing for months, and both of you had to be involved in this. Your daughter knew you were going to hurt me. She knew. The morning you left, you both acted like nothing would happen. Last night, lying in bed, you never gave me the slightest hint that you were going to leave. Carol blushed and looked at the ground for a moment, remembering our last sex. But damn, you're a damn ice queen for making love to me like that and then just walking out the door. I kept pushing. And for the record, I didn't give up. You abandoned me. You broke our marriage vows and took another man and became a cheating bitch. It was you who acted like a coward and ran away, and then did everything to make sure that I couldn't follow you. You manipulated Mackenzie into becoming the same selfish, spoiled bitch you have become. You might have the decency to let my daughter be my daughter. But no, you had to do it. You did what you wanted, had someone in your path. So tell me, Carol, have you ever loved me? She softened for a moment and looked like she was about to apologize. Then something occurred to her and her eyes narrowed. Fuck you, Terry. You know what? My daughter and I will be fine without you. Stephen is twice your size, and we can do it without your plumber's salary. I laughed. Yes, he is twice my size. You better keep an eye on this. The idiot's belly is pretty big. And before you met him, I don't remember you ever complaining about me being a plumber before. You know what, Terry? I raised my hand and sighed. Carol, stop it. You and Make-Nice have made your choice. Now you have to understand that I am no longer a part of what you do. I gave you the money that the court demands, and since I am no longer part of it. If you have made a choice about yourself or your daughter, I prefer to walk away and remove myself from the equation. But this money was Mackenzies's, not yours. You must give them to her. And now, again, it's about money. Moreover, it's over now. You never said you were sorry for the way you treated me, the way you left, the way you so carelessly turned my own daughter against me by putting a restraining order on the spot. Carol was now looking at the ground, with something like shame on her face. It's obvious that you came here only for one thing, money. So that doesn't mean you can't get something from this account. But hell no. Neither you nor she will receive any of this money. You and her new dad can find the money if she goes to university. You're the one who keeps saying how much better this slimy piece of crap is. Carol looked like she was about to explode. I looked at Mackenzie sitting in the passenger seat, sobbing. I didn't know if it was because I had given her a small dose of life, or because she had lost me. I'll probably never know. I raised my hand again before Carol could say anything. Carol, no matter what you say, it won't help. We're done. Knowing that I once loved Mackenzie and you with everything I had, I would have given my life for either of you, and you will not like what has come to replace it if you continue to insist. So go back to your new life and do what you want. I will do what I want with mine. With that, I turned back and continued attaching the mounts to my truck. She stood there for about 5 minutes, just looking at me. Then she turned and left. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched her sit in the car for a couple more minutes and talk to Mackenzie. One day Mackenzie got out of the car. However, Carol seemed to be holding her back. I never looked at them directly. I just finished securing the tools in the truck. Then, as I was doing final checks and walking around my truck, I noticed the car was gone. I spent a few more minutes making sure everything was set up. The house was clean. I got in my truck and drove away. I wasn't sure what would happen next in my life, but I would try to be prepared for it. Ha, ready for this. Little did I know that life was about to throw me curveballs that I was never prepared for. Loaded with the tools of my trade and all my worldly possessions, I smoothly drove onto the highway. I kept switching radio stations, looking for something that suited my mood. Every station seemed to be playing the funeral march of my life for the past 6 months. Songs about loss, betrayal, or how I was treated badly. Rock songs screamed pain. Classical stations played sad music. Pop songs talked about traitors and country. Well, country songs talked about how my woman left me and took my dog. Every station talked about my grief, but not about my future. Eventually, I switched to Spotify on my cell phone, connected it via Bluetooth to my truck, and turned on chill hop tunes, music without lyrics that I could listen to relaxing and enjoy the ride. Why did I leave? Well, a little over 6 months ago, my wife of over 15 years left me for another man, a narcissistic, chubby doctor. More precisely, as I recently learned, to a surgeon with a superiority complex and a narcissistic grin that would make even a politician blush. And to make things even worse, it wasn't just my wife who betrayed me. My daughter Mackenzie believed what her mother told her and left me too. As far as I understand, she worked with her mother for over a year, filling out the paperwork so that this stupid doctor would adopt her and make me insignificant in her life. Then, after everything was completed, adding insult to injury, both women showed up on my doorstep the day I was leaving town. My ex-daughter, now adopted by the aforementioned idiot, Dr. Stephen Morrison, wanted me to spoil her and give her gifts. I admit I was a little harsh in my response. I told both women that they were dead to me. Neither of them knew where I was going or what I was doing, but I'm sure they assumed it had to do with plumbing since that was my qualification and one of the main reasons they left me. Apparently, in their opinion, a plumber is not as good as a doctor. So, after a divorce and that miserable adoption process, I drove about 6 hours from Maitland to Bathurst to join Delotti's Inc. as the new quality manager. I met the owners, William and Martha, the night my ex-family left me with nothing but a goodbye letter at our local hospital. They kept in touch with me during my divorce. Then, as soon as it ended, they offered me the position of lead quality manager for their range of plumbing products. This was very important, and that is why I was now traveling south and trying to find music that I could listen to so as not to shed tears after losing my family. A few years ago, I bought a used Ford F truck and then customized it for my job. I replaced the body with custom toolboxes, installed a new rocker with powerful lights and a heavy winch in case I get stuck in the mud on a construction site. I also installed all-round lights for night work, allowing me to work day or night almost anywhere. The few times Carol, Mackenzie, I went camping, the modifications to my truck were invaluable. With my customization and off-road capabilities, I was confident that my truck could go anywhere. It certainly consumed more fuel than the typical Ute Common in Australia, but I thought it was worth it. I spent the first couple of hours reflecting on the last few years, and now, looking back, I could see how both women were moving away from me. It wasn't obvious, but the passionate kisses from Carol turned into restrained ones, and then into short kisses on the cheek. As for Mackenzie, we used to go on father-daughter dates to stores or cafes where we talked about everything. It gradually changed from this loving relationship where she adored spending time with me to, "Dad, what can you do for me?" I loved them both so much that I didn't notice anything. My sister Kim said that I allowed their inconsistencies out of love, not thinking that I would be betrayed by those I loved so much. I would still be in the dark if Carol hadn't had an affair with that idiot doctor and he convinced her to leave me. Even though I hated that idiot for stealing my family, I think in retrospect, if it hadn't been him, someone else would have come along sooner or later. Carol just wanted to trade me for something better and get rid of me. At some point, I stopped at one of the roadside gas stations and filled up the tank. Went inside to pay and buy a couple drinks and snacks. While I was inside, I heard the weather forecast on the TV hanging on the wall. A few strong storms were expected later today. Perfect. The weather was going to reflect my mood. After filling up the tank and quickly checking the connections, I returned to the highway and drove at a moderate pace. I hoped that by evening I would reach my new two-room apartment. I had just over a week before starting work at Delotti's Inc., so I had plenty of time to go for a walk or drive around the area. While in the suburbs of Bathurst here in Australia, I also wanted to visit the famous race track. Growing up watching races with my dad, I considered going to the track my life plan. I was also looking forward to checking out the local cafes and bars. Coffee and evening drinks are the lifeblood of a traddy like me, so knowing the right places will help me make new connections and relationships. As I continued to drive, I continued to reflect on my life lately and began to feel depressed. Despite my recent conflict with Carol and Mackenzie, I still did not have a clear understanding of why they treated me the way they did. Hell, they filed a restraining order on me, not allowing me to see them or that asshole doctor during the divorce process, all the while demanding that I let Mackenzie be adopted to become Mackenzie Morrison and no longer be my daughter. Kim, who was both my older sister and my lawyer, convinced me to sign the documents because, given the time and effort it all took, it was something both of my betrayers did with full understanding. The weather became gloomy along with my mood. Dark clouds gathered as I drove, as if the approaching storm knew about my anguish and pain, deciding to splash it out on the land I was driving on. Maybe, if I'm lucky, a storm will pass over the Morrisons' house and lightning will strike the house and burn it to the ground. When it started to rain, my internal agony continued to mount, and I began to feel real pity for myself. I was sure the windows were up, but for some reason my shirt became wet, as if the water was not outside, but inside, as I continued to feel the pain of losing my family. So, while the rain fell outside, the water of my tears flowed inside, and I grieved as I continued to drive. Then the skies burst into flames, and the rain began to pour down in thick torrents of water. The downpour became so heavy that I had to slow down a bit to make sure I could see the road ahead as lightning tore through the sky and thunder roared across my cabin. I drove for almost 2 hours through a storm, sometimes light, sometimes so strong that I could barely see in front of me. And all this time I cried. Betrayal, love, hatred, every sign past gave me distance. Every tear was a memory of love. Every lightning outside reminded me of pain. I noticed another roadside gas station and turned there. Driving in such a storm is tiring and requires concentration. Add my emotions to the mix, and I was pretty tired. I filled up the tank again and parked in one of the rest areas, falling asleep to the sound of rain hitting the windows. About half an hour later, I woke up, and I must admit I felt much better. It seemed that most of the storm had passed. The rain was still falling, but much lighter, and most of the lightning and thunder had moved further away. I took this as a good sign, switched back to the radio at the local country station, started the truck, and got back on the road. I had been driving for about an hour when the news announcement came on the radio. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the interruption in our program. However, the Bureau of Meteorology has just announced the formation of a superstorm front that is developing just behind the storm as it passes through the Sydney region. As a result, all residents from Newcastle to Orange are asked to seek shelter due to the potential for damaging winds, hail, and heavy rain. Over the next 10 minutes, they gave details. Several low cyclones combined and used the moisture created by the previous storm to create a much larger system. I knew I was going to get into it, and there were no real stops between where I was on the highway and Bathurst. There was a risk that my truck could be damaged by hail, which could damage and even break the windows. However, if it comes down to it, I could take shelter under one of the highway bridges. Since I was in a decent 4x4 truck, rain wouldn't be much of a problem for me as I could drive through all but the worst weather. So I continued on my way. It started to rain again, and I focused on the road. Once again, walls of water came crashing down on my truck as I drove. But this time, after crying a lot for the last few hours, I was focused and kept my mind on the road and what I was doing. At one point, it was raining so hard that I almost missed my turn. I now pulled off the highway onto the road that led to my new location on the outskirts of Bathurst, next to Delotti's Inc. It was a good road, but unlike the highway, it had no streetlights, and the sides of the road weren't that wide, so I had to be careful. I would say I had been driving on this road for about 20 minutes, and was expecting another hour or so of driving at this low speed when I noticed a light in my peripheral vision. The rain was pouring down harder again. The drops fell so hard that it seemed as if the entire percussion department of the orchestra was hitting my windshield. However, my eyes were focused, watching the road ahead and looking to the sides as needed. And it was during one of these side glances that I noticed the hazard lights of the car ahead. But the lights were strange. They were not standing on the side of the road as they should be. Instead, the lights were almost perpendicular to the road I was driving on, and at an odd angle. I slowed down sharply as I got closer, and then stopped when I got close to a car that was clearly in distress. It was the latest Land Rover Sport, one of those SUVs that doesn't have low-range gearing, but was still usable off-road if you knew what you were doing. Unfortunately, the car appeared to slide off the road and end up in a drainage ditch for some reason. To make matters worse, although the hazard lights were on, the nose of the car was deep in water that appeared to be rising. I didn't know if anyone was in the car, so I pulled over and turned on my truck's hazard lights and all the surrounding lights I had installed. Although I doubted anyone would drive down the road at that speed in this weather, the light hopefully alerted drivers to the fact that I was parked on the road. I put on my waterproof jacket and grabbed a flashlight before getting out of the truck. However, once I was outside, it didn't really matter. As I stepped out of the truck, I realized that I was going to be soaking wet because of the storm. I walked towards the Land Rover and saw that the car was firmly stuck in a drainage ditch. She wasn't going anywhere either, as she was pinned against a large tree that had fallen into a ditch during the storm, its roots still firmly held on the other side of the ditch. Using a flashlight, I noticed that the car most likely slid off the road about 10 meters up the road, and then was washed down the ditch by the flow of water until it was stopped by a tree. In Australia, we drive on the left side of the road, which means the driver's doors are on the right. I mention this because I saw wood pressed against the passenger side doors. However, given the strength of the water moving through the ditch due to the storm, it was unlikely that the driver's side doors would open easily. I rolled down the partially crumbled bank and into knee-deep water, shining my flashlight into the foggy windows to see if anyone was conscious in the car. Almost immediately, I heard a cry for help, and so I sank even deeper into the water. "Help!" I heard a woman's voice. I rapped loudly on the glass with my knuckles and shouted back, "Window?" It was difficult to communicate due to the noise of the storm. However, I heard her answer. The car stalled. There was a hint of panic in her voice, which is not surprising in such a situation. Being washed off the road and then dragged into a ditch is stressful for anyone, so she behaved quite decently, not giving in to panic. The car's electrics couldn't have been completely disabled since the hazard lights were working, but I was sure she knew how the windows worked, so the window system was probably broken. I thought for a moment. I couldn't open the door due to the force of the water pressing on it or the wood on the other side, and breaking the glass would have been difficult and could have caused more damage. However, I had a big truck with a winch that I could use to pull them out, hopefully enough to open the doors. I also knew that I had limited time as the water was rising, and there was always the possibility that the tree might give way and the car would be washed away. I knocked loudly on the glass again, and just at that moment the rain subsided a little. "I'll go get the winch and pull you out. Don't move." "Fine," they answered me, and I also noticed the movement of the second person in the passenger seat of the car. Damn, two people, we need to act faster. I walked back to the truck, hopped in, and quickly moved it so the winch was level with the back of the Land Rover. My winch was expensive and had a remote control. Once the truck was in position, I got out and began unwinding the winch to secure it to the back of their vehicle. This took about 10 minutes, during which time the rain picked up force again and subsided at least 3 times. I noticed that the water, which had barely reached my ankles in the back of the car when I started attaching the winch, was now up to my knees. I also found that, while the Land Rover can be a great machine, its mounting points are very difficult to get to when you're in a hurry. I was able to get the end of the winch chain through the attachment point, but it was difficult to secure the other end. I finally secured it where I thought it would hold, and then began the process of pulling the car out. It was quite slow at first as the metal cable was stretched between my truck and the car. However, after a few minutes of careful ascent, the car began to gradually emerge from the water, inch by inch. I wasn't too worried about the weight of the car pulling my truck into the ditch. My Ford F-truck was 3 times heavier with my tools and stuff, so I kept lifting the car. It took about 10 minutes until I was able to pull the car out enough to open the doors. The moment I felt she was sufficiently out of the water, I stopped the process. Before I even got to the water, now up to my knees, the driver's side door began to open. The door was still under the force of the water, so I had to help open it. However, as soon as the driver managed to open the door, my life changed forever. I extended my hand to her. The rain was still pouring in buckets, and helped her get out of the car. Her face was striking, pale skin and a scattering of freckles contrasting with the most stunning mane of red hair I had ever seen. She wore a dark green skirt that showed off her curves that would make any man turn around when she moved. The white blouse, which in a dry state would have emphasized her impressive breasts, became transparent in the rain. She was wearing a white lace bustier. It didn't become as transparent as her top, but it still got wet. I had to look away to avoid looking at her transparent clothes. She blushed a little, realizing there wasn't much she could do in this weather, and I made sure my eyes were glued to hers in deference to the stunning view she was giving me. And those green eyes. I could look into them forever, not noticing that we are standing in the middle of a severe storm in which her car just nearly drowned. And so it was as if that moment had passed. I helped her to her feet, made sure she wouldn't fall into the water, and turned to help the passenger out of the car, but I had to look twice. If the driver was magnificent, then I was again stunned to see a double of the beauty that had just stood in front of me. She was an exact copy of her sister, and there was no doubt that they were sisters. The same curves, hair, eyes, and freckles on her face, slightly different from her sister, but this could only be noticed if you looked closely. She was climbing over the console to get out of the driver's side door when I saw her. She was also wearing a skirt, dark blue this time, with a white top, and she had to lift her skirt to get over the console. I helped the second beauty get out of the car, and the three of us, having overcome the water, came out onto the elevated bank of the ditch. Luckily, the rain had let up a bit at this point, so we didn't have to scream at the top of our lungs. "Are you both okay?" I asked, looking at them. They both nodded. "Yes, thank you," answered the sister in the green skirt. "I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't come," said another sister in a blue skirt. I looked at the winch cable. It was taut, and although the water was still pressing on the car, the tree continued to hold it firmly. I could probably get the car out, but it wouldn't be easy, and if the car didn't function electronically, I'm not sure what else could be done. "Listen, can I call someone to come and help you? I don't know what else can be done for your car right now. The main thing is that you are safe. By the way, I'm Terry." The sister in the green skirt looked back at her car and frowned. The other sister looked at me and answered, "I'm Harmony, and this is my sister Melody. Thanks, Terry." "Yes, thank you, Terry," Melody said. "We were washed off the road, and I couldn't do anything when the water started pushing us back. When we were pinned by a tree, I tried to open the door, but the water did not allow it to open. When we drove into a ditch, the car's electrics went out, and we couldn't do anything. Harmony was trying to figure out how to break the window when we saw the light from your flashlight. You have no idea how much of a hero you are to us right now. Probably, if we had not stood in the rain at dusk, you would have seen how we both blushed. I wasn't a hero, I just saw people who were in real trouble, and I could help." Melody continued, "As for help, now we have no one to turn to, since in this area there is a weak mobile signal at the best of times, but now, most likely, there is none. If it's not too much trouble for you, could we go with you? We were driving to our parents' house, about 15 minutes down the road, when this happened." "Of course, no problem. Is it necessary?" "Harmony, no," I shouted, changing the topic of conversation. At this moment, everything happened almost simultaneously. One of the first rules you learn when using a line, winch, or any other towing device is to never stand directly in line with a live line when it can be avoided. If there is a lot of load or pressure on the cable, if it breaks, it can release thousands of pounds of force in an instant. Being caught by such unleashed force could cut a person in half in the worst-case scenario. Harmony moved behind the car to look at the cable, not realizing the danger she might be in. Considering that the water was pressing on the car, there was enormous tension on the cable. In addition, the risk associated with debris floating downstream increased. In fact, this is exactly what happened. When I screamed to Harmony about the danger, Melody turned to look at her sister. The next moment, there was a loud crash as a large piece of debris, washed down the ditch by the flow of water, hit the front of the car. From that moment on, everything happened in slow motion as I saw the winch cable strain due to the sudden horizontal movement of the car. The enormous force pushed the cable in a direction it was not designed for. Unfortunately, my quick anchor point gave out, and I tried to run through the mud and water a few steps to pull Harmony out of the way of the cable, which could snap at any moment. We all heard the crunch and sound of metal parts being torn apart by the impact of the debris as I did my best to get to Harmony and push her out of the way back from the cable that was probably going to break in a few moments. I literally jumped the last few feet, catching Harmony in a leap that should have pushed her out of the way of the dangerous cable. Alas, this was not quite the right action. Fortunately for me, the cable itself did not break. Bouncing back straight towards my truck, it ended up at a slightly different angle, bouncing off the car's anchor point directly at Harmony and I, who had jumped to the side. Just like the last time I jumped to save a beautiful red-haired girl from danger, I rolled around trying to become a shield for her body. I grabbed her by the waist, my arms wrapped around her back, her chest pressed tightly against me as we rushed to avoid the rope. The world slowed down to a speed where time barely moved. Instantly, while hugging Harmony, I was able to look into those stunning green eyes. I saw fear why the stranger grabs her and pushes her to the ground. I saw confusion as my scream began to reach her, and then surprise when she looked into my eyes and saw the agony as the cable bit into my left side. Luckily for me, it was a large chain that hit me in the side, and thanks to the relatively low speed of the line, it didn't cut me in half. However, it still cut into my left side and bruised it badly, then went along the back of my left forearm, opening a large wound from my shoulder to my elbow. Finally, we hit the ground and time started moving again. Not, I didn't know what I was saying, but the pain in my side was getting worse. The next moment, Melody was there. "Terry," she screamed. I groaned, and Harmony, freeing herself from my grip, looked at my side and gasped. "Will he be okay?" Melody asked her sister excitedly. I didn't understand what was happening. My side was burning, despite the rain that was still pouring down on us, but I heard Harmony trying to talk to me. Don't ask me how I knew which sister it was, but I just knew. "Terry, thank you, you saved me." And she leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. "You'll be fine. You're going into shock, and I want you to know that I'm a nurse, so we'll take care of you." I tried to concentrate. Harmony asked, "Terry, I need to know if you have a first aid kit in your truck, and where is it?" "Driver's side, front drawer, green sticker on first aid kit," I croaked. She nodded and looked at Melody. "Mel, I'll go get the first aid kit. It will be faster for me, since I know what to look for, and you need to keep him on his side and try to keep the wound closed." Melody nodded. "I will do so. I will do everything I can. Come back quickly, he needs you." I felt movement and more pain. My arm was literally burning from elbow to shoulder, but I tried not to move, closing my eyes. Harmony walked up to my truck, and if I could have watched, I would have seen sexy Melody taking off her shirt in the downpour and tearing it into strips to try and bandage the huge wound on my left arm. Clad only in a wet, almost see-through white bustier, I would be treated to one of the most impressive sights man has ever seen. A sexy, curvy red-haired girl, biting her lip, tears her shirt to bandage my wound. A moment later, I felt her kiss my lips, which made me open my eyes, and my eyes met a pair of beautiful green eyes. I hope you know I don't do this for every tall and handsome hero, only the ones who save my sister and I from certain death in a drowning car. After a few minutes, she used her torn shirt to create a basic bandage that stopped the wound from opening further. And it's a good thing she did, because a few minutes later Harmony came back, and she was upset. I tripped, and the first aid kit fell into the mud. She saw what Melody did and calmed down. "Great decision, Melody." She looked at me for a moment. I was still in shock, but for a moment I was able to gain clarity. "Help me lift Terry into his truck. I'll check the bandage, and we'll figure out what to do next." It took us a few minutes. On my right side, my good side, I was supported by a half-naked Melody, and on my left side, Harmony was trying to lift me up without causing me much pain. We didn't make it right away, but they put me under the headlights of my truck. I could stand, but I needed help. I felt weak. "We need more bandages. It's still bleeding too much," I heard Harmony complain as she examined my wound. Then, following her sister's example, she also took off her shirt and tore it into strips to use as a bandage. Being a nurse, she did an excellent job, and within minutes my wound was tightly bandaged with parts of their shirts. I just wish I had time to appreciate the two half-naked women who assisted me, but I was starting to lose consciousness. "How do we get out of here?" asked Harmony. "We don't know when someone will pass by and be able to take us for help." "I can lead, I'll get us out of here," I said. "No," both girls turned to me in unison. "I will lead. This thing can't be any more complicated than the trucks in the factory," Melody said as she looked at my F truck. If I didn't feel so bad, I might have raised a couple of objections. But it turns out I didn't need to worry. Even though Melody was a sexy girl wearing only a green skirt and a sexy white bustier, she also had a heavy vehicle license. Who would have thought? This took a few minutes. The girls held me in the driver's seat until they rearranged the back seats so Harmony and I could sit in the back while Melody drove. Melody settled into my truck almost immediately. She removed the broken cable and figured out how my headlights worked, successfully turning them off. I remember how she easily pulled the truck onto the road and set off again, not knowing where to go, but it seemed like she knew where she was going. The last thing I remember is soft lips on my lips. They felt the same as before, but also a little different. I opened my eyes and a pair of beautiful green eyes met mine. "It's okay, Terry. We'll take care of you, and thank you. You saved us both." After that, I saw everything in a fog and must have lost consciousness. It is unknown how much time passed, but I slowly woke up. I heard the soft beeping of the typical hospital machines you hear when waking up after a serious incident. But it couldn't be a hospital bed. She was too soft. Slowly, I opened my eyes. It took some effort, but I saw a ceiling at least 12 feet high with stucco. The curtains were drawn, but I could see that it was day outside, probably late morning if my instincts were correct. My left side hurt, I felt a wound on my side, and I was afraid to move. I also felt the prick of the cannula from the medical Roman 4 on my right arm and the patches on my chest. I tried to move a little and found that it was difficult for me. The reason was that Melody's body lay prone on my waist. Her hair was a little messy, her arm was around me in that gesture that people usually use to express their love and comfort. Turning my head to the left, I found Harmony there. She held my left hand tenderly and seemed to be dozing until I moved. As soon as I looked at her, her deep emerald eyes met mine, and I saw her face light up with a smile. "Hello," she simply told me. "Hi," I croaked and tried to smile back. "Has he woken up?" Melody asked, rising from my torso and looking at me. "Yes, our hero is with us again." Harmony smiled and squeezed my hand. "Waking up after a serious incident surrounded by two adorable sisters taking care of you isn't the worst thing that can happen." Melody looked up at me and gave me the same bright smile that Harmony had given me moments earlier. However, Harmony switched into nurse mode and began to examine me. After a few minutes, she checked my pulse, looked into my eyes with a small flashlight, and listened to my heart with a stethoscope. "Wait, I thought only doctors had such things." I tried to joke. She laughed quietly in response. "It looks like our patient is not only an amazing hero who saves damsels in distress, but he also has a sense of humor." It wasn't particularly funny, but she understood that I was trying to be positive. She handed over the stethoscope. "I borrowed it from a friend. He'll come by later to check on you. I know the basics of caring for the injuries you went through a few days ago." She took the phone next to the bed and waited a moment. "He woke up," she said into the phone and put the phone back. "A few days?" The question in my eyes asked the same thing, and Harmony nodded. "You've been asleep for almost 4 days, Terry." The girls must have sensed the panic in my voice. 4 days? Oh God, I need to call my new boss and let him know about this. I should have notified him of my arrival 3 days ago. I didn't want to start working for William and Martha without reporting what happened to me. "It's okay, Terry," Melody smiled, looking at me. It was the smile of a man who was not worried about his new friend. It was the smile of a man who knew something I didn't. "We have already taken care of this. Your new employers know where you are and what happened, and they told your sister. So everything is under control." The sudden tension I had felt disappeared, and I relaxed. "Are they okay?" "William and Martha have been my rock, as has Kim," these past few months. I would hate to disappoint them. I didn't notice how another voice entered our conversation. I don't think we could be more proud of you, Terry. You are one of the most amazing people we have ever met, said a familiar female voice. Martha stood in the doorway of the huge room, and William next to her. When they entered the room, Harmony stepped aside, but did not let go of my hand. Martha sat down next to her. For a moment I was stunned. The resemblance between Martha and the girls was striking. Although Melody and Harmony had slightly curvier figures, their hair was the same color, although it had a slight wavy edge that Martha didn't have. But the eyes, Martha and the girls had the same eyes. Martha leaned over and put her hand on me. William continued to smile. Terry, you saved our girls. William told me in a tone that only the most grateful person could say with genuine affection. I looked at Melody, then at Harmony, then at Martha, and finally at William. They all smiled at me, and everything fell into place. Are these your daughters? Of course I knew, but now my mouth couldn't keep up with my head. Of course we are silly, Melody giggled. How many beautiful red-headed twins do you know with wonderful parents who hire incredibly handsome, heroic men as their quality managers? She said it as if it were an obvious fact known to everyone. We laughed, and I felt pain in my neck. I must have been under strong painkillers because the pain in my arm was practically not felt. Harmony was instantly next to me. It's okay, Terry. For now, just lie down and don't try to move. In a couple of hours, when Dr. Hill comes to see you, we will pick you up and help you move. I nodded my head slightly. I should probably ask what happened and where we are. Doesn't this look like a hospital? Melody chimed in. We're all at Mom and Dad's house. I doubt you remember anything. You almost lost consciousness as soon as we started driving. As for what happened, we got out on the road, and as soon as we got a little further along, your phone got reception, so we pulled over and called Mom and Dad from your truck. She paused. Sorry we used your phone without permission. We lost ours in the car and couldn't ask you. She looked a little embarrassed. It's okay, Melody. You did the right thing. What happened next? She beamed as if I had just praised the puppy for a new trick, but Harmony continued the story. Melody managed to get through to my dad, and we told him that we had been in an accident, but that we had been saved by a man who was seriously injured. We wanted to take you to the hospital, but it turns out that one of the main bridges into the city was flooded, and it would take hours to get there, so Dad told us to bring you here. William chimed in. I admit I was panicking when they called me. There was a lot of emotion in the air, and they kept saying Terry had saved them and that he was injured. I didn't know they were talking about you until they pulled up in your truck and asked me to help get you out. Melody laughed. Dad almost put you back in the truck when we came out with no shirts on, and then he saw that it was you, that you passed out, and his attitude completely changed. I smiled. William, I barely understood what was going on after I was hit by the cable, so I can tell you that despite the possible pleasant moments, your girl's honor is fully preserved. William looked at me with a serious fatherly expression and then laughed. Harmony leaned over and kissed my cheek. After a moment, she whispered in my ear, If it's a matter of honor, we'll have to make it up to you later. I blushed, and I'm sure William, Martha, and even Harmony understood what she said as they all laughed. After the laughter at my embarrassment died down, Melody continued. We were able to get you here. Harmony dressed your wound while we waited for Dr. Hill. The Hills are friends of ours and live a few houses away, so luckily he was able to come quickly. I looked at William and Martha. Dr. Hill, is he related to Marge? Yes, Simon is her husband. After the evening we met, I managed to convince them to move here to Bathurst, and they have been good friends ever since, William noted. Martha added, We were worried for a while that we might have to call a helicopter to bring you in. You've lost a lot of blood and had a fever ever since you saved our girls. However, Simon was able to get stitches and get some A+ blood from local donors thanks to your donor card in your wallet, and we were just waiting for you to wake up. There was silence for a few minutes as we all digested different parts of the story from different perspectives, and I realized I wasn't the only character here. Melody, Harmony, I know you think I saved you, but I have to tell you that you both are my heroes too. You both saved my life. Harmony, if you weren't there to treat Melody and me, if you couldn't drive, I might not be here. The girls had tears in their eyes and big smiles on their faces. I could see that William approved of the praise directed at his daughters. But surprisingly, for someone who had been sleeping for almost 4 days, I started to feel tired again. Harmony noticed this. Okay, that's it. I think Terry needs to rest a little more. He's out of danger, so let's give him a few more hours of sleep before Simon comes here. She then turned to me. Terry, you need to get some more sleep, and when Simon checks on you, we'll give you a bath and get you back on your feet. The way she said the word, we redeem, there was a thirst in her eyes, as if she wanted to help me personally. After the last 6 months without sex and a beautiful woman hinting at possibilities, my manhood suddenly became tense. But after a few minutes I fell asleep, feeling a peace that I had not felt for many months. My eyes closed, and I thought of Melody first as I opened the car door, helping her out. Then I thought about Harmony and how she felt when I grabbed her in that leap that knocked me unconscious for 4 days. Yes, both girls were beautiful identical twins, and I could see how I could quickly develop feelings for either of them. I slept well for the next few hours and woke up when Dr. Simon Hill arrived. After a full examination, I was declared well enough to stand, which was good because after a few days in bed, it was time to go relieve myself. Simon left to talk to William, and Martha and Melody closed my bedroom door. When I tried to stand up, both Melody and Harmony were immediately there, helping me stand and providing the necessary stability. I can handle it myself, girls, I said as they supported me to the toilet. It was something private that I didn't want to be watched. They laughed. We're not sure, Terry, you're still pretty weak, Melody said with a smile. I think you need some help. Before I knew what happened next, Melody lifted the toilet lid and Harmony helped me take off my pants. They both helped me sit up, but made no attempt to leave the bathroom. Melody walked over to the shower and turned it on, then began to undress. Relax, Terry, we are with you now, and we will never let you go, she said softly. Several minutes passed before I was able to answer nature's call. During this time, Melody raised the temperature of the water and was left wearing only a skimpy black thong and a matching lace bra. Harmony stood up and began to undress while I sat there. She was wearing dark blue panties, but no bra. When she unbuttoned her shirt, I almost lost my composure. I looked at them, then at her eyes as she smiled, and then at Melody, who also took off her bra, showing me identical breasts. Enjoy yourself, darling, Harmony said. The girls looked at each other, then nodded and turned their backs to me, simultaneously removing their panties. Come on, hero, let's take a shower, Melody giggled, turning to me, pleased with my surprised expression. My manhood was completely delighted with respect for them, and I continued to look at their bodies. About 10 minutes later, having cleaned me almost completely, and I do mean completely if you know what I mean, both girls stood up and pulled me towards them for a deep and sensual kiss. Afterwards, they helped me out of the shower, dried me off, and put me back in bed. I fell asleep instantly and slept until early evening. A few hours later, I woke up rested, but to my surprise, alone. I expected girls to be with me. However, I didn't have to worry as Melody came into the room to check on me a few minutes later. Sitting down on the bed next to me, she lightly kissed my forehead. We knew you needed more sleep, so we helped Mom and Dad get ready for dinner. She jumped out of bed and walked over to the dresser on the other side of the room, showing me a pair of curvy calves in short jean shorts. Now that you're awake, I'll help you get dressed so we can eat. Thank you, Melody. I paused, wondering how to mention this sooner, or honestly, if it even happened, it was so surreal. Was that a dream I had before? She giggled as she laid out her underwear, jeans, and shirt. She came over to me again and sat down on the bed next to me, placing her hand on my cheek and looking deeply into my eyes. I was fascinated by her gaze and felt something between us. No, Terry, it was not a dream. Harmony and I have a lot to discuss, but we've talked a lot over the past few days, and we've decided that we'll both lay claim to you if you'll accept us." She looked at me with a deep gaze, blushing slightly. "Will you accept us?" I just looked at her, lost in her eyes. It seemed like hours passed while we looked at each other, and I would have been happy if this went on even longer. "Yes, Harmony, I will, if you accept me. But—" A question appeared in her gaze. "You have to go slow. I know there's something between me and Harmony and you, and I can't say no to amazing things like what happened this afternoon. I feel like I could easily fall in love with both of you, but I'm still dealing with the after effects of the divorce, not to mention I haven't recovered enough physically to take care of both of you." She nodded, feigning wisdom, sitting back down on the bed. At that moment, Harmony came in, having heard my conversation with Melody. I sighed and continued. "Besides, who am I to say no to two of the sexiest women I've ever met who claim they both want to be with me, and there doesn't seem to be any jealousy?" They both looked at me and smiled, shaking their heads. "We just need time, and of course we need to talk to your parents." The girls laughed. "Don't worry about Mom and Dad. I think Mom has already realized that we both have feelings for you, and when the time comes, we will all discuss it with them. But now you're right, so we will move slowly and help you recover." The girls helped me get dressed with minimal touching. Harmony checked the bandage on my wound, and both girls took me to the kitchen. It turned out that I was in the guest bedroom on the first floor of William and Martha's huge family home. William's grandfather built this house almost 80 years ago. The home had 8 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, formal and casual living rooms, 2 kitchens including servants' closets, and a 6-car garage. When I heard that William's grandfather built the house, I asked for the story. William smiled as he began to tell the backstory. "My family comes from the English aristocracy. My great-grandfather was Earl of Lancashire and had a large issue. Although my grandfather inherited a lower title, he became the last generation in his line with a noble title. So he and my grandmother decided to emigrate here to Australia to make their fortune. They had a decent inheritance, and my grandfather decided to get into production. After a few years, he discovered that there was not enough demand for plumbing products, and our family found our niche. So he bought the 500 acres of land on which this house is located, founded Delades Inc., and then began building a family home and business that was passed down from generation to generation." I looked around the room in admiration. "This is amazing, William, and thank you so much for taking me in and taking such good care of me. With the exception of Paul, Kim, and my parents, it's been a long time since someone took such good care of me. You shouldn't think about it. I just have to make sure my new quality manager gets back to health." He winked at me as Melody placed another chicken enchilada on my plate. I've already eaten 3, as well as 2 chicken thighs and a pasta salad. At this time, Harmony poured me some more iced tea. Martha smiled as she watched her daughters take care of me. "William, I don't think Terry will have any problems with the way these girls take care of him. But girls, we need to give Terry some space." "Oh, Mom," they said almost in unison. We all laughed and enjoyed our dinner. The next week, I was surrounded by care from morning to evening. Simon came back twice more to check on me. However, thanks to Harmony, I always had someone to bandage my wound and make sure my recovery progressed as quickly as possible. There were several more showers where the girls helped me wash, sometimes together, sometimes alone. We played a little, but it never went any further than the first time. We also spent a lot of time talking, getting to know each other, our common and conflicting interests. It was a little strange, like I was dating 2 very similar women at the same time. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to abuse their hospitality, even despite the girls' attention. So when I mentioned that I needed to go into town and get settled into my apartment at the end of the first week, the girls looked like they were about to cry. William stopped it. "Terry, please don't be offended, but I called the owners of the apartment and canceled your lease. Martha and I want you to stay with us for a while longer. You can stay in the guest bedroom, and once you're ready, you can come to the office with me so you don't have to drive until your arm gets better." He looked at me, then briefly at his daughters. Besides, I don't think my girls would ever talk to me again if I let you go. Melody walked around the table, hugged William, then kissed his balding head. You are the best, Dad. He looked at me again. Sorry if that seemed a little presumptuous of me, but after what you did for my family, it's the least I can do until you recover. I was a little shocked at what they did for me. It was a beautiful house, and I could not have asked for better accommodation. I also couldn't complain about the company. Although our relationship had only lasted a few weeks, it felt like months already. The girls were witty and smart. They knew how to laugh. They knew how to conduct both frivolous and serious conversation. Like many twins, they were on some wavelength where they knew what the other was thinking. During my recovery, I often had dark thoughts about Carol and Mackenzie. Melody and Harmony sensed this and spent a lot of time talking to me, asking questions, and helping me process what I was feeling. I had a lot of anger inside me, but they never avoided me when I was upset. This was a big difference from Carol. When I was upset in the past, she would tell me to get over it and leave the room. With girls, one of them was always there for me when I was going through something, and over the years we never went to bed with a grudge against each other. At the end of the second week, Simon came and removed my stitches, complimenting Harmony on her care of me. Melody pouted slightly until Harmony shared her praise, telling Simon that Melody had done almost as much for my care. I was prescribed mild painkillers once a day and given an arm sling for the next month. My arm itched and the scar was tender, but otherwise everything was fine. Harmony told me that I would probably always have a small scar, but as she hugged me, she said that she would love it as it was a sign of the night I saved them. My evenings were wonderful. Most often I fell asleep hugging one or both girls. Of course, our hands wandered and passion was present, although we never went completely intimate, although I would not refuse. The following Monday was my first day at the office. I lived with my boss and couldn't drive, so I rode to work with William and, surprise, surprise, Melody. Melody was an office manager at Delottes Inc. She handled administration, logistics, and helped with finance and personnel matters. William drove a new Ford F truck similar to the one he bought last year. While he drove, Melody sat in the back with me, holding my hand and smiling as she talked about some of the people I was about to meet. The first week in the office was a bit surreal. Everyone already knew me before I arrived. The story of how I saved the girls was well known in office circles. First, I was introduced to my team, which consisted of 3 people in the quality department. They basically walked around the manufacturing floor, following established procedures to inspect or test components, evaluate their quality at random intervals, and write reports. My role was to monitor and adjust procedures as new raw materials were introduced, and then report to the entire management team and produce quarterly reports for the board of directors. For the most part, I found everything to be well established. A few days later, while reviewing the reports, I walked around the shop with Sally, one of my employees, and checked out the PVC joint production process. I think if we increase the thickness of the joint by 3 millimeters at this point in the manufacturing process, I said, pointing to the production diagram, we can increase the strength of the joint by about 5 times. I also held one of the knee joints at 90 degrees in my hands. You know, there were a few times I wished I had a stronger connection when I was laying a lot of drainage pipe in a trench. The shop manager, Doug, frowned. Yes, but it will require significant changes in the heating process. Can you take some time next week to walk me through this process and see if it's possible? Doug looked at me for a few moments. Sally and I waited. Of course, he replied. Will he come tomorrow at 10? No problem, Doug, I said with a smile. I'll look forward to it. As we left, Sally took a deep breath. Damn, Terry, you did great. What do you mean? Well, Doug always hates it when someone comes and tells him how to make his products better. He has been managing the PVC production for more than 10 years. The usual situation. The new guy proposes, and Doug makes a fuss and tells him where to go. But when you asked him to sit down and work through it together, I think you showed him that you respected his opinion. I don't know him, and he doesn't know me. So I thought working together to improve the quality of our products would be beneficial for everyone. You'll go far as a quality manager with that attitude, Sally concluded. We had several meetings with Doug over a number of products over several weeks. Once he saw that I was really interested in his opinion, and I shared my practical experience as a plumber, he suggested a lot of ideas. We worked through them and made small but effective changes to some processes, resulting in improved quality without significant costs of raw materials. At the end of the first month, we just returned home. Yes, home. I began to see William's house as my home. Melody walked over to me and took my good hand, standing up on her tiptoes to kiss me on the cheek. "What is this for?" I asked. "Does a girl need a reason to show affection to someone she cares about?" She answered with a smile. "No, but did it look like gratitude for something other than general affection for me?" Melody looked slightly surprised. "Damn, Terry, you're right, it was gratitude, but for work. I know you haven't been here long, but I'm already getting feedback on how well you're doing. Even Doug tells everyone how smart you are, and that says a lot." "I don't know, Melody. Your parents took a risk by hiring me. I just want to make sure I do my job well. I'm just using my experience with the product to help make it better." Melody shook her head and took my hand as we walked into the house. She led me to the sofa, sitting me down next to her. For the first time since we met, she ignored my words. "You do more than just work. Over these few months, I saw why my parents wanted you to come and work with us." She blushed. "You're just the perfect person." I laughed, not knowing what to say, and Melody snuggled up next to me. From the moment I met the girls, I knew there was something special between us. Although the pain of my former family's betrayal was still palpable and a constant theme in our conversations, it began to fade in the face of the care and love that Melody and Harmony showed me. My problem was that they both liked me, and I could see myself in a relationship with either of them. They have already said that they both want to be with me, and have said this several times. Considering that they both slept in my bed, and we had more than exciting shower games, I again began to think about the possibility of a relationship with both of them at once. We sat there for about 15 minutes before Melody spoke again, picking up on my thoughts. "Are you okay, Terry? You seem to be struggling with something that doesn't have anything to do with your ex-family." I shook my head, hugging her a little tighter with my good arm. "No, just processing everything that's happened over the last couple of months. I was deeply hurt by Carol and Mackenzie, and your parents became my second family during this time. I have to admit, I feel happier than I thought I could, but there are a few things I'm still trying to wrap my head around." "Which ones, for example?" "Mostly feelings. I don't know how to explain it. So much has happened in the past year that I never expected. But it makes me wonder what's next, so I don't know how to feel about some things." I think she understood what I was trying to say, but I had a hard time meeting her gaze. "I think I understand. To be hurt so badly and then change your life and everything completely is not easy." She quickly kissed me on the cheek. "But then saving a couple of damsels in distress, getting hurt, and then finding out they're your new employer's daughters. And against the backdrop of all this, both girls feel something for you, and without any jealousy they want to be with you." I nodded, and she put her hand on my cheek. "Darling, believe me, I understand. If I were you, I'd probably be confused too." I looked at her and met her gaze, nodding slightly. Then she pulled away from our embrace on the couch and looked at the door expectantly. At that moment, the front door opened and Harmony walked in, returning home from her shift at the clinic in town. We said hello for a moment, and Harmony sat on the other side of me, looking first at me, then at Melody, sensing that the conversation was serious. Melody continued, "Terry, I hope you know that we are here for you, and that goes for both Harmony and me. We are not going to abandon you or kick you out of our lives. In the short time that you have known our family, you have done more for us, sometimes without even knowing who we are. I know that my parents consider you their son," she blushed. "Well, Harmony and I, well, we." She stammered, "I think we might be falling in love with you." An expression of extreme vulnerability appeared on her face. Looking at Harmony, I saw the same expression on her face and a slight blush. I know, girls, the closer I get to both of you, I squeezed their hands, the more the terrible memories of Carol and Mackenzie recede. They squeezed my hands back. But I don't know what people will think about all this if I introduce my girls, in the plural, and explain that they are identical twin sisters. Melody laughed. Well, first of all, handsome, every man you meet will be jealous of you. Of course, they will give you high fives and fist bumps of approval endlessly. We all laughed. Harmony added, Terry, I understand what you're saying, but I think we can help in a few different ways. First of all, why don't we invite your parents, sister and brother-in-law here for the weekend? It will be good for you to see them in person and not just on the phone, and you can introduce us as your girls and see how they react. Martha laughed as she stood in the doorway of the living room. She listened to us for several minutes. That's a great idea, Harmony, and to add my 2 cents, I think your relationship is sweet. As a mother, I never thought I'd see both of my daughters fall in love with the same man without fighting like banshees from hell. But on the other hand, I can't complain because something in your relationship looks quite reasonable to William and me. We all thought for a moment. Listen, Terry, I know my girls love you. William and I also consider you the son we never had. We'll figure out what happens next. But now dinner will be ready in a few minutes, and you all need to get yourself cleaned up. The girls took me to my room, helped me undress, and escorted me to the shower. We washed ourselves together again, exchanged a few passionate kisses, but dinner was almost ready, so this time we had to leave it at that. I had to hide my excitement in a pair of jeans until we headed out to dinner. After dinner that night, we called my parents, my sister Kim, and her husband Paul, and agreed that they would come over on Friday in a month and spend the long weekend with us. From that evening on, Melody, Harmony, and I became practically inseparable. Often, Melody and I would finish work and drive into town to pick up Harmony after her shift at the local clinic or hospital, depending on where she was working that day. Luckily, most of her shifts were during the day, which coincided with normal work hours. We spent a lot of time together, ate together, and discussed plans for the future. I discovered that the girls and I had a lot in common. Some funny moments that strengthened our relationship. For example, Melody loved lasagna as much as I did, and Harmony was a fan of Kraken rum like me. Melody was a big Star Wars fan, and while Harmony also liked Star Wars, she was more of a Marvel fan. I really enjoyed watching them discuss movies and their geek side. I wasn't as into it as they were, but I also liked a good sci-fi movie with action. I noticed that Melody tended to dress a little brighter, adding stylish shoes and scarves to her look, while Harmony opted for more subdued fashion, but often showed a little more leg or cleavage. A couple of times the girls tried to pretend to be each other by changing their clothes to confuse me, but it never worked. One time when we were at a restaurant in town, a great Italian place that we all liked, the girls went to the toilet, and during this time one of the employees we knew came up to me to talk about the upcoming fair. When the girls returned, I thought that one of them decided to play the role of the other. I smiled as I watched our waiter address Harmony, but something was wrong. He started talking about the fair, but I couldn't stop laughing. All three looked at me. "What is it, Terry?" asked one of the twins dressed as Melody. "Sorry, George," I turned to our waiter. "The girls decided to play a prank on you and me. See, it's not Harmony you've been talking to for the last 5 minutes, it's Melody." All three of them had their jaws dropped for different reasons. "How did you guess?" asked George. I shrugged. It's hard to explain, but there are many reasons why girls look different. But the main thing is that when I look at them, they seem different to me. Is it true? I shrugged again. Yeah, I don't know if I can explain it, but I just feel it. Melody smirked as she looked at Harmony. "We'll see," she said, and her sister answered her with a devious smile. Over the next month, in anticipation of my family's arrival, the girls constantly tried to trick me into thinking that one of them was the other. Sometimes they tried to make me believe that they were themselves, but they behaved differently. In other cases, they swapped clothes or rooms. One day, Harmony tried to come to work instead of Melody. I let her last until almost lunchtime before I gave her a difficult task that only Melody could complete. Your dad needs that report in an hour, I told Harmony. I could see that she was trying not to panic and not give away her trick. She thought that this time she had succeeded in tricking me. Of course, dear, he will be ready as usual. Great. Oh, and by the way, yes, you should probably call Melody and ask her to help with this. I left laughing. William noticed me laughing as he walked out of Melody's office, while Harmony sat there, caught in the ruse. He raised his eyebrows, beckoning me. What has my daughter done this time? Nothing, I replied. The girls tried to prank me again. They thought I wouldn't notice, so I structured the day to catch them doing it. So you understood right away? Yeah, from the moment Harmony got in the car pretending to be Melody, I knew. So I kept giving her more tasks until I gave her a task that only Melody could complete. We laughed about it for a few minutes. I guessed that they were trying to trick you. Normally, I wouldn't allow this during work hours, but knowing your relationship with the girls, I decided to see how things turn out. He stopped and looked at me. You know, not many people can tell girls apart, even up close. However, almost from the moment you met them, you always knew which one was which. He stood up, walked to the cabinet in the back of his office, and returned with a bottle of Michter's whiskey and a couple of glasses. It wasn't long before lunch, and William did this sometimes with managers, but given the topic of the conversation, I wondered where he was going. He poured us both a portion. Perhaps it's time to ask, how do you like working here? The question took me by surprise. I thought we would continue to discuss my developing relationship with his daughters. But I smiled, taking a sip of whiskey. Honestly, I'm delighted. The people are great, the work is interesting, and I feel like I'm doing something important for my fellow plumbers around the world. I can't thank Martha and you enough for the opportunity. You gave me a chance when I was at my lowest, and I hope I live up to your expectations. I fell silent, suddenly thinking that not everything was so rosy. Why do you ask, William? Did I not live up to your expectations? He snorted, looking into his glass, which already had a third of the drink left. Quite the opposite, Terry. He looked up at me. Everyone adores you. You listen to people, don't yell at them, and when you find a way to improve a quality or process, you involve the right people and share the credit. Our former quality manager, Tom, was well-liked but very conservative in his methods. You've brought so many new ideas that I think we'll have to look at new growth projects by the end of next quarter, at least twice as many as we expected. He looked at me thoughtfully, the look a boss might give to his subordinate. But it was not a critical look, rather a searching one. Honestly, everyone likes you here, and I hope we live up to your standards. On the one hand, it's easier to talk to you because we're close, I nodded. On the other hand, it's more difficult. I watched as he took a long sip of his drink. There was almost none left in the glass. What I want to say is that from the moment you saved the girls, I see an obvious connection between the three of you. I know they spend most nights in your room. I would have to be blind not to notice the affection between you. He sighed. Terry, I'll be honest. When I look at you, I see the son I never had, but seeing you three together is not easy. After all, they are my daughters. He fell silent. Now it was my turn to take a long sip of the drink. I felt it burn my throat as it flowed down. I thought for a few moments about how to respond. William and I have known each other for a little over a year, and I knew that this topic was as difficult for him as it was for me. I sighed. You're right, William. My feelings for both of your daughters are growing every day. Even today's joke made me feel like they both really love me. William looked at me. You said you feel loved because they are trying to trick you at work. He raised his eyebrows. When I was growing up, my older sister Kim loved to make fun of me, like all older siblings. It was never malicious, but she always pushed me to be better. She challenged me to always look for the hidden truth when she teased me. She always tried to help me and was always there when I was in need. I feel the same way with Melody and Harmony. We spend a lot of time talking, And yes, there was a lot of physical affection. He looked at me sternly, his fatherly instincts starting to kick in, but then he softened and waited for me to continue. Over the past month, the girls have tried to confuse me in different ways, making me think that one of them is the other. But even today, they never denied it, and there was always a smile on their faces or a twinkle in their eyes. They could test me, but they would never do it to hurt me. They make sure to discuss this with me every night, making sure they don't go too far and hurt my feelings. I have never received such attention from Carol or Mackenzie. I looked down at my glass of whiskey. I know I still feel pain from what Carol and Mackenzie did to me, but Melody and Harmony made sure that those memories began to recede. Of course, I still have a lot to comprehend. I need to sort out my feelings, and probably there will still be conflicts with my former family. But still. What is it, Terry? Asked William. I think. No, I know I'm falling in love with both of them. I lowered my shoulders as I admitted this to their father. One confession healed the wound left by the past, but opened a new one, being in love with two sisters and telling their father about it. They're both different, but when I look at either of them, I feel like I couldn't be happy without both of them. I looked at William, who sat swirling the remaining drops of whiskey in his glass, lost in thought. I'm sorry, William. I probably shouldn't have shared this with you, since these are your daughters. I know how much family means to you, and it's probably harder for you to hear me say it than it is for me to say it. He snorted again, like that time in the hospital when the doctor attacked me. He seemed to have decided something in his head. You're right, Terry. I love my daughters more than anything in the world. There's nothing I wouldn't do for them. Martha and I have been watching you three for the past few months, and I won't lie, you're not easy to watch. But Terry, he paused for effect, they want you. Melody doesn't want you apart from Harmony or vice versa. According to their conversations with Martha and me, they both want you equally. It may be a weird and unconventional attitude, but if you make my girls happy, I'm not going to stand in your way. And of course, as a father, it's not easy to hear you say this, but I think you're wrong. I think this is the hardest thing for you right now. You love two girls completely and completely. Can I give you some advice? I nodded, taking another sip of the fine whiskey. Just be yourself. These girls will get what they want when they put their mind to something, and when they put their minds to work together, there is little that can stop them, not even their parents. Watching you, I am sure that no matter how things turn out, the three of you will always be close. I smiled slyly at him. William, I must say, you are taking all of this quite calmly, considering that you are talking to the person who is caring for your daughters. Terry, from the moment the girls entered adolescence, I can count on the fingers of one hand how many times they've dated guys. When one of them showed interest in the guy, the other began to take a closer look at him. This is the first time I've seen them agree on a guy, and honestly, I like you. I like the idea of my daughters being with you because I know what kind of character you have. After what happened to you, I'm sure you'll never hurt them. We talked for a few more minutes, and as we were about to go to the production floor together, we heard footsteps quickly retreating outside William's office door. Opening the door, we noticed two red lights hiding in Melody's office. Looking in, we saw that Melody had joined Harmony. Both looked embarrassed. I wonder how much they overheard our conversation. The weekend my family came to visit was a little bittersweet for me. They admired the house, complimented me, but joked about my relationship with the girls, and we had a wonderful time reminiscing about the past. We all listened to stories about my childhood. Kim told stories about how she teased me at school. We even looked back fondly on some family moments with Mackenzie. I felt a little sad towards the end. These were good memories, even if they were marred by other people's actions. And then the next blow hit me. My mother, Josephine, was quiet all evening. But suddenly, she took the floor, and everyone fell silent. Terry, we need to tell you something. If you remember, a few months ago, right around the time of your divorce, I was not feeling well. We passed several tests, and recently we retook them and received confirmation. I realized that this would be bad news. There were tears in the eyes of Mom and Dad, but Mom continued. I have cancer. There are some things in life that can hurt a lot. I've been through some of them, but hearing that my mom had cancer was something I wasn't prepared for at all. Mom, I know this sounds stupid, but are you sure? My father John chimed in, yes, son, we are sure. As far as we know, this is a fairly rare type of bone cancer. There are treatments, and we don't know what will happen next, but we wanted you to know. My father, a master plumber, has been around my whole life, and I never saw him cry when he told us about it. Although, I admit, everyone cried. For the next hour, we sat together. Harmony went inside, picked up her tablet, and asked her mom and dad for details so she could look up information about the type of cancer and treatments. She spent a few minutes browsing the sites, mostly ignoring Dr. Google, turning to medical sites she knew, and gave a good overview of treatments and chances of success, which to her delight were relatively high. At the end of the sad conversation, everyone began to go to their rooms. Tomorrow is Saturday, and after brunch, we were all heading into town for some shopping. So after a while, all that was left was Kim, Paul, Melody, Harmony, and me, as well as the remains of the pitcher of sangria Martha had prepared earlier. Kim, how is Mom really doing? I asked at one point. She's depressed, bro, Kim said sadly. I've known this only a few days longer than you, and I admit that several times during this time I fell asleep in tears. I mean, that's our mom. I know, I almost exploded. After everything that happened last year, I was hoping we would have a break. I felt Melody squeeze my hand and Harmony take my other hand. I looked at Harmony. I know cancer is always serious, but how serious is this one? I asked Harmony. She thought for a moment before answering, as far as I can tell, it's a fairly rare species, and if caught early, it's not that dangerous. However, in later stages, it can progress rapidly as it affects the bone marrow. I guess I'll have to tell Carol and Mackenzie about this. I slouched. Of all the difficult conversations I will have, this will be the most painful. Kim looked at me. Not now, Terry. Let these bitches wait until we find out more about Mom's treatment. She seemed to be keeping something back. What are you not saying, Kim? She sighed, which had become quite common lately. It was less than a week after you moved in a few months ago that Mackenzie contacted her mom and dad and asked them to meet. And you didn't tell me because? Well, at that time you had just had an accident and were recovering thanks to your eternal assistance. She smiled at the girls. We thought that in your condition you didn't need to know about it. I swallowed and gave Kim a stern look. She raised her hands in defense. Terry, we weren't trying to hide anything. It's just that once you got better, it didn't come up in conversation anymore. So what happened? Well, Mom and Dad were upset. They hate what Carol did and were of course disappointed with Mackenzie, but they still love her, so they agreed to meet. Jerk Stephen brought Mackenzie. She introduced him as her new father, and my mother almost exploded. Kim smiled sadly. Their meeting lasted less than 5 minutes. Dad asked Dr. Jerk to wait outside, and when he insisted that his daughter would not come into the house without him, Dad asked them both to leave. Mackenzie began to cry and said that they were being unfair. She cried because she didn't see them on her birthday and didn't receive any birthday gifts from them. Well, at this point, Mom lost her temper and told Mackenzie pretty much the same thing you said, about her being a selfish little bitch. Mom told her that she was disappointed that she had lost her loving granddaughter and that she was ashamed of what she did to you. Did Mom really say that? My mother never swore. Yes, Dad laughed when he told me about it, although there was not much fun in his eyes. Anyway, after that, Dad asked them to leave again. They got into the idiot's BMW, Mackenzie cried, and as they drove away, the idiot gave Mom and Dad the middle finger out the window. That's the last Mom and Dad heard from them. Looks like he's a real jerk, Melody exclaimed. Well, he's having a hard time in the hospital right now, Kim told us, and went on to tell us that he was on probation without bonuses for 2 years because of the way he treated me. As far as I understand, he has a trust fund. However, it is limited and there doesn't seem to be much left in it, So he and Carol have been living beyond their means for the past few months. I snorted. Well, they've been having sex behind my back with Mackenzie's blessing for the last few years, so I don't care how they're doing. I thought for a moment. Actually, I hope they're doing well. Kim laughed sincerely for the first time in a long time. She looked at my girls. Girls, could you leave me and my brother alone for a few minutes? No problem, Kim, Harmony said and stood up, hugging me tightly. A moment later, Melody did the same. Paul kissed Kim, and the girls took him by the arms and led him inside. We watched them leave smiling, both smiling at Paul, who felt awkward in the company of the two beauties his wife was looking at. Terry, besides the news about Mom, I have some more news for you. I think she saw the panic in my eyes. I wasn't sure I could take another hit tonight. Relax, bro, it's mostly good news. I waited. You will become an uncle. I almost jumped over the table to hug her. She told me they were at 12 weeks, but didn't talk about it because of my accident and recovery. I was a little angry, but I understood. We talked for a few more minutes, and I realized she was really excited, but a little scared about becoming a parent. A few minutes later, her mood darkened as she changed the subject. Terry, one more thing. Carol is suing you for withholding university money. She and the jerk insist they own it. Of course, they claim it's all for Mackenzie's education, but who knows? I shrugged, looking at my sister. It doesn't surprise me, Kim. The day I left and I had a chance to vent to Carol, I realized that she was only minimally upset about what I said. All she wanted was money. Everything else was just decoration. What do you think? I wrote a response to the court and referred to the divorce conclusion. Of course, I don't expect anything to come of it, but you need to know. She looked at me with a question in her eyes. I'm guessing you didn't touch them. There was no need. My annual salary is almost double what it is in this account, and the bonus that William talks about if we continue to work is also significant. Not to mention, I made a wide gesture with my hand around me. I live here almost for free. I tried to give William and Martha money for rent, but they refused, saying they don't need the hero's money. Kim laughed. Yeah, and while we're on the subject of heroes, how are things going with you and these two? Asked my sister, smiling. Kim and I have always been close. When she and Paul started dating many years ago, I was her confidant. Even before my problems with Carol and Mackenzie, Kim always knew what I was thinking. Honestly, I thought it would be years before I felt anything again. But when I look at them, I feel something I never knew with Carol. You mean one of them, right? No, Kim, both. I have different feelings for each, but I love them both equally. We all have different preferences, but I love them both equally. I can't start a relationship with one without hurting the other. We discussed this among ourselves, and the girls say that they want to be together with me and not separately, and in my mind I cannot separate them. Kim looked at me searchingly for a moment, as she had done before and now again. Terry, I don't know if I can give you the right advice, but one thing I can say for sure is that both of these girls have exactly the same feelings for you. We were silent for a while. Have you slept with them yet? She suddenly asked. I almost spat out my drink. Who is? She laughed. I'm serious. Have you slept with them yet? Well, sort of. They fall asleep in my bed most nights, and they helped me shower while I was recovering. I blushed, remembering, especially the first time. But no, I haven't had sex with them yet. Why not? I looked at my sister. Seriously, I'm one guy, and there are two of them, and they're sisters, it's just. She brushed off my concern. Listen, if I'm right, and I usually am, both of these girls adore you. I watched how they look at you, how they touch you. They know that you have a conflict inside, so they talk to you about it. If you can date both of them or sleep with both of them, and it's okay for them, who can stop you? Our society now accepts almost everything. Part of me loved the idea of meeting and making love to two beautiful sisters, and more than once I fell asleep thinking about sex with them when we all fell asleep on my bed. I don't know, Kim. It's not in my nature. Nonsense, brother. I saw your face just now. You thought about them both in bed with you, I'm sure. I blushed. Kim was usually right. I won't deny that this is every man's fantasy, but still. Terry, what? This is much more than just a hobby. I see it written on their faces. Even now, I see it in your eyes. It's not just about sleeping with them. It's not just a fantasy. You actually fall in love with both of them, don't you? I stopped and looked at my drink. Yes. Then you need to take action. I understand that you're a little scared about Carol and Mackenzie, but I'm sure from what I saw tonight that they feel the same way about you. So, for the love of God, Terry, do something. I looked at Kim, then took a sip from my glass. Kim, I'm a little scared. I don't want to lose any of them. I don't think either of them understands how much they both mean to me. We do everything together. If I'm in town, I'm with them. If I'm at home, I'm with them. I don't want to ruin everything. For me, it's all or nothing. Kim laughed. Oh, my poor brother, you're really hooked, aren't you? I smiled for the first time in a long time. Yes, that's probably true. I love them, Kim, both of them, completely and unconditionally. For the first time, I openly admitted it. Talking to Kim, I felt like I could trust her. Listen, Terry, I'll give you some feminine advice. First, act, because if I'm right, and you know I'm usually right, they'll take matters into their own hands. What do you mean? Call it women's intuition, but I know they won't wait long for you to understand what's going on, and you won't expect it when they come to you. She grinned. We talked about girls for another 10 minutes before Paul came out to Kim and said it was time for bed. Apparently, my pregnant sister's husband wanted her to get a good night's sleep every night. We went inside and both Melody and Harmony came downstairs. They were wearing cotton nightgowns that didn't hug their figures, but I realized they weren't wearing bras underneath. They hugged Kim and Paul and said good night, and then they grabbed me and dragged me into my bedroom and tucked me into bed. They climbed on either side of me and hugged me tightly. Good night, Terry, Harmony said in a seductive voice, kissing me tenderly and sensually on the lips. Good night, Terry, Melody said, mirroring her sister's tone and kissing her on the lips. When I woke up the next morning, Melody was on my right, her head resting on my shoulder, her breathing light, as if she had just fallen asleep and any movement would wake her. On the left was Harmony. She was wide awake, her emerald green eyes looking at me. They were both under the sheet next to me, and I felt their warm bodies next to mine, skin to skin. When Harmony saw me open my eyes, I felt her hand slide down. She smiled at me. Good morning, sleepyhead. I smiled back, and at her words Melody woke up. She turned to cuddle up to me and softly kissed my chest, trying to sink further into my embrace. I felt her hand on my chest, and her chest pressed against my side. Harmony blushed and spoke. Terry, we have a confession. Yes? Melody lifted her head from my chest and sighed. In response to my question, she exchanged glances with her sister. I started to get used to the way the twins reacted to each other sometimes. When I went inside with Paul last night, we kind of walked into my old room and overheard the end of your conversation with Kim when you were talking about us. I was immediately fully awake, and my first reaction was embarrassment, which made me want to pull away. Terry, Harmony said as Melody pinned me to the mattress. We're sorry we overheard, but Kim is right. We're both in love with you. At first you were the hero who saved us, but over the past few months, as we got to know you better, our feelings have developed into something more than just friendship, and although our feelings are different, they complement each other. When we heard what Kim said last night about you being able to date both of us in a way, we already feel like you already are, judging by the way you treat us. Melody continued, when we heard your confession to Kim and realized that you were conflicted within, we decided to take action ourselves. We've been discussing this for weeks. We are sisters and twins, so we both want you, and it is not a problem for us. Do you want us? She looked at me with a pleading look, deep green eyes shining for someone who had just woken up. But there was a spark in them that was consistent with the words they spoke. Yes, I looked at them both, letting the last barriers of resistance in my mind melt away. They smiled, and I felt both of them press closer to me. But how, I mean both of you with me, how is this going to work? Melody laughed. He's still a guy who just thinks physically. Terry, Melody, and I talked about it. We are ready to share with you. We have always taken care of each other, and you already know that being naked in front of each other is not a problem for us. And before you ask, no, we have never had and never will have sexual relations with each other, so you can keep that fantasy to yourself. I snorted. I considered the idea, but dismissed it as fantasy, just like the conversation I was having now. We would love to love you together, although if we want to move forward in the relationship, we are open to seeing us having sex together, although you will be the focus of our attention. I think we all blushed. Damn, well, the attention and love of two beautiful women who love me at the same time. What man in his right mind would refuse that? But girls, what will everyone think? Melody snorted. Mom already talked to us about this a few weeks ago. She has watched us grow closer and is cautious but happy for us. I was trying to figure out what to say next when Harmony leaned in and kissed me thoroughly on the lips. This kiss was not the chaste kiss of gratitude that I had received in the past. No, it was a kiss of soul exchange, full of passion and need. Our tongues danced as her hands moved even closer to my manhood. My turn, she said happily. With these words, Melody pressed her lips to mine, and I again felt the exchange of souls. Her kiss was just as passionate as Harmony's, although she used more tongue. When she pulled away, I looked at both girls, now at my girls, and did not see a trace of jealousy in either look. You just felt it with both of us, didn't you? Was Melody's question. Yes, although I don't understand it, but yes, there was something in both of you. Something I've never felt before, not even with my ex-wife. We spent the next 10 minutes exchanging kisses and touches in our lovers' arms. Terry, can I come in? It was Martha. Of course, Martha. If this relationship was meant to happen, then I suppose the sooner we all get used to it, the better, including the family. Martha opened the door and walked in. She saw how the girls surrounded me and stopped. I wasn't quite sure what she was thinking until she smiled and came and sat on the edge of my bed. It's okay, girls. Your dad and I have been watching you three for weeks, and William told me he talked to Terry the other day. But girls, she paused and looked at both of her daughters. If this happens and you both claim Terry as yours, I never want to hear either of you complain about the other. Am I making myself clear? Yes, Mom, they both said in unison. And Terry. I swallowed. I felt like it was a shock. Yes, Marta. Her gaze became harder. Although I know you are one of the most honorable people I have ever met, don't think for a second that I won't gut you like a pig on market day if you harm one of my girls. I swallowed, and she smiled. It's okay, Terry. I would say this to any fan of my girls, but the fact that I only have to say this to one man is both easier and more difficult. You three will cause a lot of gossip in the city. Now breakfast will be ready soon, so I want you three to get up and join everyone else. With these words, Martha stood up and left. Pig, huh? I looked at the girls. On market day, Melody giggled and then kissed me. Well, that's a really nice pig, Harmony said, sitting down and shaking her breasts at me. We kissed for a few more minutes, and the girls stood up. They were topless, and I was admiring the view, and I have to admit that when they both bent over, I wasn't sure if I would be able to get out of bed while we were all getting dressed. Breakfast was good, bacon and eggs with hash browns, spinach, and of course coffee. The girls sat down next to me, and although they exchanged glances, nothing was said. Kim smiled at me throughout breakfast and then cornered me outside while everyone else went to get ready. With the way those two are acting towards you this morning, you took my advice and made your move, huh? Actually, no, she raised her head and looked at me. But what I just saw. I grinned back at her. They eavesdropped on our conversation from there yesterday. I pointed to Harmony's old bedroom window and decided to take matters into our own hands when I woke up this morning. I had two nearly naked beautiful women in my arms. And no, before you ask, nothing happened since we were interrupted, but we agree that there is what that is. She laughed. My brother, the stud bun, has gone from being a cheater and two-faced daughter to two women who steal the show in both beauty and devotion. But Terry, yes, please be careful with it. I'll do it, Kim. The next couple of days were wonderful with my family. William arranged for Dad, Paul, and I to have a cool lap at the Bathurst Supercars track while the girls went to the spa. It's been years since I had this much fun. There was no pressure, no obligation to be somewhere by a certain time, no demands for money. It was just casual fun where everyone was having a good time. Then, of course, when everyone got together again, the girls clung to me whenever they could, sometimes together, sometimes separately. It was nice to be wanted. When my family moved back to Maitland, I agreed to come for a weekend in a couple of months, when Mum came out of her first round of cancer treatment. I would also use this time to meet up with a few friends and follow up on legal matters regarding Carol and Mackenzie. The girls and I continued to develop our relationship, and they mostly spent the night in my room. Most nights, all three of us slept topless, and more than once I woke up holding their magnificent breasts in my hands. That all changed on the Wednesday evening before I was due to return to Maitland. We have just finished dinner. William, Martha, the girls, and I were sitting in the living room, each of us with a book to just relax. The conversation was easy, the atmosphere was relaxed. Harmony read Pride and Prejudice and laughed. I looked at her. Her eyes shone with joy as she smiled at what she was reading. I tickled her calf with my foot, and she looked at me. I love you, I said without thinking, and the room became silent. It took me a few seconds to realize that I had just said out loud what I was feeling, and I almost fainted. I mean, I hesitated. I looked at Melody, who was now looking at me with wide eyes, as if she was afraid of being left out. No, I want to say that I love you both. It was time to sort everything out and say the words out loud. Melody and Harmony, since you came into my life, I feel alive like I have never felt before. To have two amazing girls who love me so much and allow me to love them back is more than I could have ever dreamed of. I leaned towards Melody, I love you, Melody, and pulled her towards me for a kiss. Then I leaned the other way, I love you, Harmony, and pulled her in for a kiss. Then awkwardness set in. William and Martha sat watching us. Until that moment, we had not kissed in front of someone else. The girls dropped their books and melted in my arms. They both looked at me like puppies, with love in their eyes. William cleared his throat. Terry, it's okay. I think we've all talked, and we're old enough to understand what's going on. This is new for all of us. Just take care of my daughters, please. Believe me, I don't want Martha to take you to the fair. A light joke lightened the atmosphere, and we all laughed. We put our books aside and spent the next hour talking openly and honestly about how the three of us were now in a real relationship. I again emphasized that I fell in love with both of them, and the girls then said that they loved me too. When we went to bed that night, I snuggled up to my girls, and they hugged me tightly, their kisses light and gentle. I thought we were all falling asleep when Harmony spoke. Terry? Yes? I want you to be with Melody first. I was already falling asleep feeling love, but suddenly I woke up. Excuse me. She smiled at me. She was lying, as usual, on my left, while Melody was on my right, nestled on my chest. We both looked at her. I know that it is only a matter of time, my love, before we give ourselves completely to you, and I have thought about it a lot. But I want you to do it with Melody first before you do it with me. I pressed her cheek to my hand. Why, Harmony? Because Melody is a virgin and I'm not. I looked at Melody and she nodded. Harmony continued. As you know, Melody and I haven't dated much. We tried to protect each other from the guys until you showed up. I nodded. I heard this from both William and the girls. Well, when we were 19, I had a boyfriend, Chad. Melody frowned and Harmony blushed. Chad and I dated for about 6 months while I was studying to be a nurse at university, and although Melody didn't approve of him, I still continued to date him. One evening, we went to a party and had a few drinks. Before I realized what was happening, I let him get between my legs. A tear rolled down her cheek and Melody reached out to her sister. The next morning, I woke up in an unfamiliar room alone. I felt vulnerable, and when I got dressed, I started looking for him in the rooms. She fell silent. I felt that it was hard for her to talk about it. I placed my hand on top of hers, squeezing it while Melody continued to hold the other side. When I found Chad, he was naked and lying behind a famous girl on campus, Charlotte. I cried, feeling used. I ran out of the house and ran home and spent the next 3 days in my room crying. Melody and Mom helped me when they found out what happened. Chad never called me again. The next time I saw him on campus, he stopped and walked in the other direction. Later, I heard someone talking to him. Melody and I believe that Mom and Dad were involved in ensuring that Chad no longer had anything to do with me, but we never confirmed it because we never spoke about that evening again. I moved a little, pulled Harmony towards me, and turned her slightly, pressing myself against her, kissing her. I looked into her eyes. Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me this. I promise I will never make you feel so used. I think you know that you're sister and I love you. Melody stepped back, giving us space but not letting go of her sister's hand. Harmony nodded, a few tears rolling down her face. She kissed me again, then looked at Melody. I know, Terry, and I love you so much, but I've already had my first time, and I want you to give it to Melody before you give me my second. Okay, I said. Okay, Harmony repeated, smiling at me. Melody, I turned and looked at my other girlfriend. Yes? Take off your panties, please. Both girls opened their eyes in surprise. However, Melody moved forward, lifted her hips, and pulled the black cotton panties down her hips and legs, then lay back on the bed in her place. Although we had already been naked in the shower several times and had happened to caress each other, this was a new level of intimacy. I saw that she was embarrassed. I love you, she said silently, watching me caress her sister. I took turns having sex with the girls. As we kissed, she cried, I love you, Terry, it was incredible. Then she stopped talking and looked at Melody. While I was caressing Harmony, Melody was playing with herself. We love you, Terry, now you are ours, and we are yours. After that, we calmed down a little. We all got into the shower, cleaned each other up, and changed the sheets before falling asleep in a happy heap. Part of me wondered why I didn't compare this sex to what I had with Carol, but I couldn't find a comparison for it. Where sex with Carol had been just good fun, I had never felt any of the connection that I now felt with Melody and Harmony. Well, I guess it was a comparison, so there you go. I was also struck by the fact that there was no jealousy between the sisters. As they said, there was no intimate touching between them, but they did not hesitate to encourage each other when I made love to one of them. I fell asleep feeling like the happiest man on earth. The next morning, William and Martha looked at us with smiles, saying nothing, but they knew. And I think between the gentle touches and our happy faces, it was pretty obvious that we had moved to the next level in our relationship, even if they didn't hear any sounds from my room at night. We had one more night together before I went to Maitland, and I wish I could say it was a repeat performance, but it wasn't. We made love, and I made sure both my girls went to sleep happy, but we were also sad that I would have to leave for a few nights right after we took this big step in our intimacy. My trip back to Maitland was uneventful. The weather was clear, there were no storms, and the radio was playing country songs celebrating young love and the bounty of the earth. I arrived at my parents' house a few hours earlier than expected, and Mom and Dad had already returned from the hospital. Mom looked a little weak. Her eyes were a little red from crying. I hugged her tightly, and we talked while I made tea for everyone. Eventually, they asked about girls, and I, a little embarrassed, told them that we were now officially dating. I told all the details. They congratulated me and were considerate enough not to pry into my personal life, although I think it was pretty obvious that I was sleeping with both of them. That night, I went to bed in the guest room, which used to be Kim's room, now converted for guests. Dad turned my old room into his office. I video chatted with the girls for a while before going to bed. Harmony and Melody were still sleeping in my room while I was gone. They said that because she smells like me, they feel like I'm next to them while they sleep. When I woke up around 6 and the next day, I put on regular shorts and a t-shirt and headed downstairs. Dad was already up and reading the Saturday newspaper. We talked for a few minutes. He told me that Mom was still sleeping. I sent the girls a message. "Good morning, my beauties. I hope you slept well. Call me when you wake up." Then I suggested to my dad that I would go into town and buy coffee and breakfast for the three of us, which he thought was a great idea, so I jumped in my car and headed into town. 15 minutes later, I walked into the Maitland Central Cafe, which had a good reputation. I ordered and sat down to wait. The girls hadn't responded yet, so I sent them another message to let them know I'd call back in a couple of hours after I'd picked up breakfast for the family. A few minutes later, my phone beeped. They responded with a photograph of both of them lying in bed. The sheet was pulled up over them, but still showed enough cleavage to not be too provocative, with the message, "Okay, handsome, we love you." I was laughing, imagining everything that was hidden under the sheet, when suddenly I heard that voice that I had hoped to never hear again. "What's so funny?" Mackenzie stood in the doorway. She stood with her hands on her hips and a frown on her face that reminded me of her mother the last time we spoke. Even though it was only about 7 in the morning, she was dressed in designer clothes, had half a dozen rings on her fingers, and a massive gold necklace hung around her neck. Her hair was neatly tied up in an expensive clip, and she was wearing too much makeup. I saw her mother and her new father, Dr. Stephen Morrison, that idiot, walking behind her. They hadn't noticed me yet, but it was only a matter of time. Suddenly, the smile disappeared from my face. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.